Hi, friend. How you doing? It's been a long time.
Hey, Courtney. Good to hear from you this morning.
Yeah, it's good to be back together. I was just starting to watch yesterday one of your latest videos. I got interrupted, so I didn't get to the end of it, but you were telling your own experience. And, it's interesting the way these things flow, like current events. And I'm glad you invited me to do this because I think it can be really helpful and illustrative for people who were on the Sarfati space last night and are, questioning questions. It's good to just go on the record, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. And Mama Linda's here in the space. I was actually going to open up the space with just a comment about I've upset her this morning, which I totally understand. She's very, very protective of abductees, especially. And I completely understand that point of view, 100%. On the other hand, the information is already out there. And I'll just speak for me personally. I'm already on the list, or two or 10. The government's already fully aware. So if I'm going to an internment camp, I'm already on the list. Like, it's already going to happen. However, there is obviously a concern for people to start realizing, once people wake up and say, wait a minute, why is this happening? What is this? What are they doing? And you've got one side saying, oh, they're just upgrading our consciousness. Well, okay. Well, if the other side is correct, where they're not upgrading our consciousness and this is going sideways, and they're training abductees to participate in this, that is incredibly disturbing and dangerous for abductees. And that's going to come potentially from people, not just the government. And we're going to lose Linda while she's transitioning, but not just for government, but for people. And it could become very dangerous for us. So I want to let Linda go ahead and say her piece here, because she is absolutely right. On the other hand, I got some messages this morning saying, yeah, but we have to say what's happening. We have to say what we believe at least is the truth, and we should be aware, of what's going on. So I want to let Linda jump in. Go ahead, Linda.
Okay. So I've been warning about this stuff for years. It is not unlikely that we could see abductees and experiencers targeted not only by the government for internment type things in the future, because of the dangers that are perceived, especially since all the talk about y'all will know when it's time and that kind of stuff from the past. But I know specific law enforcement officials that are more than wanting to get involved with abductees and experiencers on a very personal, interrogative, take you into custody basis. I know names. In fact, one of them I will see next week, and I'm not looking forward to it. So this stuff is very, very real, and I don't like stirring up the public about it. Okay, so one of those Nashville bombings a couple of years was because the guy thought that there were aliens and stuff. Now, you have all these people who are out to get people. We will become targets in public to be eliminated if the public gets the idea that we are somehow connected with all of this. And um that is not speculation. That is based on projections of what could happen. So we have to be very wise and discerning and not stir up trouble and not cause a panic in people. And this type of stuff, openly posting does that. And so I am very unhappy, very, very, very unhappy.
And I am sorry, Linda. I truly am. I am not here to make you or anyone else unhappy. So I look at this as it's been published, it's throughout the abduction research. And this question was posed in a space last night that was very public with 150, 200 people. I think 2,000 people ended up listening to it. And so I think we could at
Okay.
least address what the question that came up in the space last night. And feel free to jump in at any time, Linda. I don't disagree with you at all. I think you're 100%
Okay.
correct.
And I do want to say that I am one of those quote pilots that was years and years and years ago. And despite all the hate and everything I've gotten over the years for making that public, it is true. And I am very protective of experiencers and abductees. And I'm serious. People, this is not just something to sit around and speculate about. This is stuff that that is real and stuff that has been discussed with law enforcement, because I know some of the conversations and I know some of the people to watch out for that are in law enforcement. And that's one of the reasons why I am concerned about the FBI involved with this, because they have a history of getting into abductee and experiencer and UFO groups and causing trouble.
And having been one of those people myself, and Courtney having had an experience after the question was asked last night. And wow, Courtney, what a question to put up to Jack in Sarah's space last night. By the way, Sarah, that was a great space. Hearing Jack, I don't know, he must have had some alcohol, I'm guessing, which is a great tactic. Just talking uninhibited, it kind of sounded like, even though he can be all over the place sometimes, it was very interesting. And Courtney asked this question, and I think there were a couple thousand people end up listening to that space. I don't think this is something that's a secret. I think it's just something that's overlooked. And I appreciate your concern. Linda, there's no one in this community who advocates more for abductees than you and who's more concerned about our safety than you. And I will just bring up a recent time when Linda was warning about a certain program that, is out there gathering evidence for or trying to gather data from experiencers. And, it turned out that I participated in that and maybe I shouldn't have. It might be something nefarious going on with that. So she ends up being right about a lot of things. And again, I entirely appreciate that perspective. But on the other hand, there is information that's out there and it's floating around in the community and people are asking questions. So I think today we were going to just address the whole Sky Pilot thing. Now, Sky Pilots, this is a book, Courtney, that was put out by Grant Cameron years ago, wasn't it? I didn't know if I should go ahead and use that, Sky Pilots, or not, if that's actually an official title of his book. Do you want to give me some input on that?
Yeah, well, I didn't have time to contact Grant this morning before we, coordinated this last minute space, but I felt it did warrant some follow-up discussion because it was brought up, on that space. So I used Sky Pilots because I was hoping that in Jack's answering the question, he would go there and elaborate on that, but he didn't. It seemed like he dodged it. He handled it more like hearing an experiencer's account, so he wasn't negative. But I use the word Sky Pilots because it seems to fall into that genre of abduction research and experiencer accounts after a close encounter.
Yeah, so I just went ahead and changed the name of the space because I think that is an official title of his book. So I don't want to I don't want to abuse it. I think that's the name of it, but I'm not sure because I haven't read it.
Yeah,
So,
it is. It's Sky Pilots, and he wrote it with Desta Barnaby.
okay, so I mean, this information is out there. The information that there are apparently abductees being trained to fly the craft. There's been a book written about it. There's tons of abductees behind the scenes, and I would never mention their names. Linda has said she's one of them. I'm one of them, and there are many others who have actually piloted the craft or seem to have piloted these craft in one way or another. People have had different experiences. And I think it's an important question. I think, like you said, Courtney, he kind of dodged it last night. I'm not sure what knowledge he may or may not have, or if he was just dodging, or if he just didn't know. He seemed like he probably would know, but who knows? So, Courtney, do you want to start us off with your question, and then if you want to walk us through your own experience, if you're comfortable with that? It seemed like you started to do that on the space last night. So I'm assuming that you're okay with it.
Yeah, so I brought up a question to Jack Sarfati in the space last night about his description of a craft and one of his contacts being inside a craft and describing it as being empty inside, right? Seamless. And so that stood out to me because of my own personal experience, which I don't talk about, but it did sound similar. So I brought up a question because there was a bunch of questions about AI and future timelines and time travel and people who have been in a craft. Now, he didn't say who his contact was that was inside the craft. And then when I brought the question up, which was about my own contact experience in 2015, I asked him what research he had about other people who had been inside the craft. And so he reiterated that it wasn't just empty, that there were 3 seats, small seats inside the craft for, like, he described it as small individuals, as children. And he went into a little bit more detail and further about this person's testimony. So he clarified that. I shared a little bit of my own experience, which was having been inside a craft after my close encounter in 2015, and that my own experience drawing on this, I was just illustrating that what I had seen when I was inside the craft was, once again, like a seamless inside, no rivets or anything. And then there was like a plasma, or I described it as an algae on the wall of the craft. That's what I saw. And that it was conscious. This was also part of what he was discussing. That stood out to me. So I brought that up. And then I told him what I saw when I was inside, which he also mentioned, was that there were like little filaments that were intelligent, metal, like AI or some type of quantum communication. So I tried to get clear responses from him based off of my own experience about what he thought that could be. And I also asked him to suspend disbelief, that it was a liminal experience that I had. And so he went into some pointed questions about when the close encounter happened. He asked if the craft shot down a beam, and he asked some other questions. And so that was pretty much the extent of it. And then my third follow-up question before we broke off and he went into another direction was about AI and any hypothesis he had about AI within the craft. And he just pointed me to different people in the research community, like Gary Nolan and a couple other people. And that was the end of it.
And I think you actually mentioned sky pilots during that conversation, though, implying that, some abductees have flown these craft.
I can't remember if I actually brought up the sky pilots or if I just asked open-ended questions to try to get more detailed information from him on his own research, but he didn't go there. So I was hoping that he would elaborate more on other encounters or experiences or people that he had heard of. I do know of one instance he had talked about someone that he knew that he met with Juan Feria, who had accessed a craft, went into it. This is not in a liminal space. This was in, regular everyday reality. And he said that this person was able to open the craft with his mind. So it's something I've been following up for a while. And that provided a chance or opportunity to ask, about, these specific parts of the storyline. but he didn't mention that individual, not while I was on that time period on the space anyway. Did he go into it later in the space? Because I wasn't there for the full space.
You know, I wasn't there for the full space either. Sarah, you're welcome to come up if you had any more information on what Jack was offering up last night. Please jump up and fill us in. So we started then talking. Courtney and I were just DMing, and we were just saying, you know, we should do a space on this with. And this was last night. Was it Courtney last night, or maybe this morning too, as well? That we should do a space on this because I think it's important information. The possibility that abductees are being trained or at least getting some kind of experience flying the craft. I think, and then what happened was I actually came across a post or a clip that I had already clipped from Jacob's abduction research discussing abductees being trained for certain tasks, and one of them is flying the ships. And then that will lead down a whole other road as to why that might be. But we can just stick to discussing flying the ships. If you have flown the ships or you think you've flown the ships, please come on up and you're welcome to speak. I can speak to my own experience with these craft. Courtney, did you have any experience with the craft? It's interesting that you saw the plasma. I've heard some conversation on this plasma almost being some type of a brain for the craft. And, you know, we don't know that every craft is the same or that it's all being energized the same way or piloted the same way or anything like that. But certainly some conversation on these plasma balls. And I'll just throw it out there that there is some speculation they're being fueled by some type of energy from us. I don't know if you've heard that.
So I'll just elaborate on my own encounter. It was in 2015. I was taking my daughter to college. We were driving from Montana to Oregon because she had to make her orientation. And it was starting to get dark. We were in the middle of nowhere on this highway 395 north of a town called Lakeview. And my daughter, who's in the passenger seat, says, "I see fireworks." And I immediately thought that was odd because we're out in the middle of nowhere. It's in September. So I start looking under my visor, trying to see where these fireworks are coming from. And all of a sudden, there was 3 flashes of light. It was at very close range over our truck while we're driving down this road. 3 flashes of light, boom, boom, boom. And then the last light hovered above the truck, and then it split into 2. Okay, 2 orbs, I would call them, or balls of light. One went on the left side of the truck, on my side, and the other one went on the passenger side. And they flashed out, and then they seemed to pace our truck as we were driving down this road. And I told my daughter, "You watch that one on the right side and I'll watch this one." And so they went up in the sky very fast. They came back down. And then the one on my side get very close. And that was the only time I felt like worried or concerned because it came very close to my side. And it went away. And we just were wondering what the hell was going on. Because at first we thought it might have been a helicopter, military exercise. We didn't know. And then as we were driving down this road, I saw what looked like, at first, a steam cloud, like as if a train was traveling alongside the highway. But then as we got closer to it, we realized it wasn't steam from a train, it was a debris, like a dust cloud, like as if something had crashed, something huge, and kicked up dust. So we got closer to the dust cloud, and I pulled off to the side of the road because there was a car in the other lane stopped. So then I'm thinking, oh, well, it's just a crash, like a car crash. And I got out, I opened the door, and it was just dead silent. It was a strange, eerie silence. And then my daughter said, "Don't go. Don't leave me." And I turned back to her and I said, "Hey, if there's an accident, we need to help out." And she said, "I have a bad feeling about this." So there was nobody in the car. There was no radio. There was nobody outside like shouting for help or anything like you would think at an accident scene. So I listened to her because she was afraid. So I got back in the truck. I turned around. I paced the mile markers on the highway where we were, and then I drove all the way back to a gas station and a town. It was pretty far away, but it was called Christmas Valley or Christmas Village. And there was a gas station, and the attendant was just getting off work, and my phone had died. So I called 911, and I reported, what happened. And the son, who was in the car waiting for his dad to get off work, at the end of my 911 call, I said there was something in the sky over this potential accident scene. And he said, "Did you see the stuff that was going on?" And I said, "We were right below it." So we drove through the night. I took her to school. But then afterward, both she and I had these after effects. And that's where the dream, right, which was like, it seemed like a noetic download, is the only way I can describe it, where I was inside the craft. And I can describe that, but that was the close encounter that happened.
Yeah, do you want to go ahead and describe that in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, sure. So for months afterwards, because I went back to Alaska, there were huge, what I would call downloads or consciousness expansion that I had not grappled with in the past. And there were dreams about UFOs. I had never dreamt about UFOs before. And in one of them, there was a craft sitting in the yard in my old house where I grew up. And there was a door open. It was sitting on the ground on like legs, like your typical craft description, silver, egg-like. And I went into it. I went into the craft. And when I went into the craft, there was nothing inside of it. I didn't see any chairs or a dashboard or anything like that, but there was this pink fluorescent, it looked like an algae, like a living algae or some kind of plasma alongside the wall. And so as I went inside the craft and looked at that closer, it felt like it was conscious or intelligent. And as I inspected and was looking at the inside of this plasma or pink ooze, there were these little tiny filaments of what looked like metal inside of it. And in the craft, I was planning to take my daughter with me, but the craft said no. It was a telepathic communication between the craft and myself. Because when I go on trips, I pack, like any mom, art supplies, crossword puzzles, stuff like that. So I was saying to the craft, I need to go get the backpack for my daughter. And the craft said no. And so I backed out of it because I was thinking to myself in this experience, if I can't take her with me, I'm not going. And that was it. So that was that download.
And then, so were you seeing these? So you were seeing these as downloads. That's really interesting. So I don't know if I misunderstood last night. After you guys pulled over the side of the road on that original incident, when you guys you started getting downloads after that, was there a download directly after that incident, or did they just start once you got home, or when did they start?
Yeah, there was just a rapid fire months. It was months. It almost took about a year for all of it coming through, which I've talked about a couple different times on a couple different interviews about how long it took to integrate all of that experience. Because one, the ontological shock of the lights coming down as close as they were, two, not reconciling what was alongside of the road or the other car, that was pretty shocking. And then for months later, it seemed to kick off some kind of recall. And that's the only way I can describe it. And my daughter too. There were memories, there were things that I kept checking in on with her about, and my own experiences just to see if she was okay. Because I was grappling with so many different elements of this afterward that went on for about a year. And then eventually I contacted Grant Cameron, because he was the only person kind of touching on these themes. And I described all the different elements of it, the downloads, but it took months. I'd say it was 6 months after the event in September of 2015 that I started to get, this material into my subconscious for, it was very intense. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but it took about a year to fully integrate all of it.
And then did you perceive any missing time when you guys pulled over the side of the road, or do you think that everything flowed exactly how you perceived it?
I don't know why, but I started watching the clock, and so did my daughter. And we didn't have any missing time. We continued to track how long it took us to get there, and then how long it took us to get to the gas station, and there was no disruption of time. But a lot of people have asked that question. The only thing that I experienced that seemed very strange was the silence when I stepped out onto the road. There was a strange kind of soundlessness. There was no sound at all. And that seems to be a common experience with people who have had encounters as well. So, no, we didn't have any lost time.
Yeah, super interesting. So did you see the downloads and the memory recall? Were you then, or what's your perspective now? Do you think that these things have been happening for quite some time and that this incident triggered your memories, or how do you perceive it now?
Yeah, well, the only person I knew who I could talk to was my dad. So he had also had a similar experience back in the 60s at our farm in Pennsylvania when he was dating my mom. And that happened on Route 29 when he was coming back from a date with my mom. And I'd always heard that story about how these green lights had gone past his car. They came at close range. His car died and it rolled to the side of the road, and he was scared to death. And then the lights came back over his car and hovered and then took off fast. So yeah, I started to kind of evaluate what happened with my daughter and I, because my dad had had a very similar experience, except our truck didn't die, that night. So he was the only person I knew. So yeah, I started to look at the history. Why did we both have these encounters? They were many decades apart. But then I found out from my sister, after talking about all this, that he had had other experiences. One time he was going up on a hunt in Canada, and he was in a Piper Cub, and lights came close to their airplane at a very close range. And once again, they were scared to death, and he never talked about it. And I didn't know about that either. And then, my sister has also had experiences, and her husband, oddly enough, has also had experiences, all with lights, though. It's all been lights in the sky or lights at close range. So, yeah, there's definitely a history of it, but I don't know the answer to it. I've just tried to continue to research it as much as I can, and there are no answers. So I've given up on trying to find answers. But when Jack mentioned this about the craft, I recognized some similarities, and that's why I asked the question.
Yeah, understandably so. And I think we're entitled to ask questions. These things happen, and then we're left wondering, who, what, where, when, and why, especially the why, and what's going on. Why is this happening? Why is this happening potentially to me and my entire family? How long has this been going on? And what does it all mean, I suppose? And I think we should be allowed to ask those questions, especially when we're the ones it's happening to. Um, Interesting. So when you look at your own history, I'm sure you now have even more questions as to what's been going on. Do you look back on your childhood and start putting those pieces together, or do you just kind of just let it sit and brew?
You know, I let it sit and brew for a few years, just listening to people and looking at history and people talking about this whole field, because I wasn't really sure where, this whole encounter fit in. There have been so many developments and releases of information about plasma and orbs. And most recently, it was Direct Perception that put up a quote from Jim Semivan about the orbs. And I had never seen it before, where he put up this quote that orbs shift and morph and change from orbs into beings. So, of course, with this whole research line about conscious, plasmas, even though it's very far fetched, I did send him a note and asked him about the quote and, more information. But unfortunately, like Grant has pointed out in Sky Pilots, there's just not a lot of information about this. But Jim did, confirm his quote, and he provided some suggestions and, recommendations, on how to follow up. He was basically like, document everything, write notes, which I did, document everything, and including the 911 call. So I don't know. I think that it's just like everybody else. You just have to watch and see what's being released, the conversation around plasma and orbs, and how it connects. Now, I just saw that there was some research released about lasers and conscious lasers. So I'm sure that's why Jack asked about whether they shot a beam down at us, which they didn't. But maybe that was why, he asked that question, because lasers potentially are being used as a weapon. I didn't feel like we were targeted with a weapon that night, but I definitely think we came upon some high strangeness that can't be explained.
Yeah, it definitely sounds that way. Okay, well, feel free to jump in and add anything else you want. I did make some notes here this morning on maybe everything I could to say about the inside of the craft, which is not a lot. I would suggest, though, that people, as a matter of fact, Courtney, if you want to fill just a couple of minutes, I'm going to, not a couple minutes, just maybe 30, 40 seconds. I'm going to just post abductee journals posts up here in the nest so people can be referred over there. So what I experienced being inside the craft, I've not had regression. So everything I experience is just conscious recall. It's my own memory. A lot of times I am somewhat alert during the incidents, but I'm not getting a lot of detail. I'm still under mind control. But abductee journal, whose memories largely come from regression, she's been able to get a lot of detail. So I want to go ahead and put that up in the nest if it might help anybody. Courtney, you might want to have a look at some of the descriptions that she's given for Inside the Craft. So I want to do that. Actually, welcome to the space, Sarah. And if you want to jump up and you can give us some history and maybe fill us in on anything else that Jack might have had to say of interest while I'm doing that.
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me, Fringe. Hello, Courtney. Thank you for sharing your story, Courtney. That was the first time that I had heard it, and I think you said it was the first time you had talked about it openly. And last night was a very long space and full of information. I am certain I have to go back and re-listen. I have to be honest, when you're hosting, you're juggling a lot of things and trying to keep the momentum going, as well as, uh, drinking. Although I think it was a really fun time. I kind of wanted to ask you, Fringe and Courtney, um, what you were sort of talking about in the beginning of this space, regarding something that wasn't good for experiencers, just so that I understand, and maybe the rest of us who have the same similar questions, so that I don't want to disrespect experiencers, and if there's something that happened, how we can move forward, especially when you were bringing up the fact that there are, you know, what are they called? Like concentration camps that you're worried that you're on a list that you're getting taken to. So I absolutely want to stand with you. And if you wouldn't mind just explaining that, that would be, or if you don't, I don't know how you want to explain that, but just so that we have a little more context.
Sure. So you were in the space last night with Jack, and I heard Courtney ask a question about the sky pilots. I thought she used that term, but maybe not. It doesn't matter. And then we got involved in a little bit of conversation. And then this morning I came across a quote out of David Jacobs' abduction research. And it was about abductees being trained in certain things. I'd have to go back to look at the post to see exactly what it said. And then Mama Linda got very upset, and understandably so. She's very, very protective of abductees. She has seen abductees being abused. Even recently in the community, she was warning about a certain research project that might not have our best interest in mind. I didn't listen to her. I did it anyway. And it's not that I didn't listen to her. I'm aware, I'm fully aware of the potential consequences for this stuff. I'm not going in blind. I was in law enforcement for almost 20 years. I know exactly, what can happen. So she got pretty upset, and understandably so, because there is some talk, and I would let her speak for herself, but she already spoke in this space, so people can go back and listen to the recording of concerns about abductees being rounded up. At what time, I don't know. There is some talk about this so-called change. We don't know if this is actually something that's going to happen or something that's just used as propaganda. But if you look at all of the abduction research, I can't help but see that they seem to be planning something. I don't know what it is. Why are they training abductees for certain things, including flying their ships? Having been one of those people, I felt like I had standing to speak on it. However, there is, I think, credible concern for abductees potentially being rounded up someday by the government, by potentially being attacked by people. Once people actually realize, and my post this morning was upsetting to Linda because I kind of pointed out, hey, why are we learning these things? Hey, why are we learning? And look, this is stuff that's largely gathered in regression, but I have never been regressed. So it's corroborated by other people who have not been regressed. Why are we being taught how to mind control other abductees? Why are we being taught how to do crowd control? Why is this happening? And my post was trying to point out that abductees are looked at like, just go stand over there, you're probably delusional. And by the way, if you're actually having a negative contact, it's probably because you're just have a negative vibe. And in reality, if we just step back and look at the bigger picture, this affects all of us, because if we are being trained, who are we being trained to control? Because it's not the aliens. Who are we being trained to crowd control? It's not the aliens. So I thought it was really important for everyone to step back and go, wait a minute, this isn't just about abductees. This is about something that might affect humanity at large. And so I thought it was a very important post, but understandably, it upset Linda because she's very protective of abductees, and I completely understand her point of view. So that's what happened before you joined.
Thank you. There's trash trucks happening right now. It's kind of loud, but thank you very much.
Well, in
Are you?
sky pilots, just as as an additive thing, to compare against what David Jacob has said, Grant did find 50 people who he documented in the Sky Pilot's book. But in his preface, he mentions that he was incredulous at first because he had this woman contact him. She was older, but she had this extraordinary experience. She described it, and he couldn't really find any information except for his own, download or noetic experience, where he was at a talk of Colin Andrews, and he was given these four key things, which were like Ben Rich's talk, Wilbert Smith, and the Americans looking at the Canadian UFO encounters and this mental phenomenon. It was kind of described generally as a mental facet to UFO and abduction research. So Grant went into it and he talks about these different threads, and Ron Johnson being one of the people who has had similar experiences of being in a craft, piloting to a certain extent, and taking people off during a catastrophic event. So it is in the research. It is in the abduction encounters. You have to be looking at it and following it. Linda is obviously an expert. And, I think I'm not going to talk for Linda either. She can, comment on her own research with all of this and her own experiences, but it's in, many accounts. There's just not a formal study on the mental phenomenon that has been talked about for years, for decades. David Jacobs is one of the people who wrote about it.
Right. And there have been others. Thanks for pointing that out, Courtney. And uh, it's okay for for us to speculate, is this for a good thing? Is this just fun? Why are they doing this? David's point of view is one point of view. There are other points of view as well. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, this brings me to Skywatcher and experiencers that are being brought in to do the controlling of the I'm just gonna say it is are they outwardly looking for an army of assets that can control the craft? You know what I mean? Like that's exact like the train of thought that I'm going down is there everything is not as it seems, and quite possibly why are so many assets being brought in? What is Skywatcher's ultimate goal? And on the front, like on the cover of the book, it seems as though it's to prove that disclosure, right? But what is the ultimate goal underneath? And this conversation with abductees and piloting crafts and learning how to do that brings me to the thought of Skywatcher bringing assets in. What are your thoughts on this?
I have many thoughts on Skywatcher. There was definitely some heavy recruitment going on behind the scenes. Yes, they were looking for certain people. Some of those people I became very concerned about because they are people who have been admittedly MKUltra'd as children. So I was very concerned about that. I also have a concern about, and I have this written in my notes, because ultimately it's likely not just the aliens who are wanting us to fly the craft. It's likely us as well. There's a human component to this, probably some black project somewhere who's trying to get us to hook up with our consciousness into certain things. I have a few things to talk about there. I don't think it was the aliens in some of the stuff that I was involved in. So I have my own concerns about Skywatcher. On one hand, I don't get involved in the conflict about disclosure and who's lying and who's grifting and all of this kind of stuff, because I look at it as all disclosure is good. Now we're not getting the whole truth, and we'd be foolish to think we're getting the whole truth, and we'd be foolish to think we understand the motives behind disclosure, because disclosure could have a nefarious motive, it could have a good motive. There's probably different factions with different motives. But I look at all disclosure as good, because I think we need to know at least part of the truth before we can begin to handle it. So on one hand, we have Skywatcher full of what appears to be patriotic veterans who've been tried and tested, coming forward with something that appears to be disclosure. So I find that to be a good thing. On the other hand, there seems to be some stuff going on behind the scenes that certainly doesn't smell right. So I don't even know where I'm at with Skywatcher. I thought their very last video was probably the best thing that they put out. I thought it was pretty decent. You know, they took out a lot of the media construct and the reality show TV type stuff, and they just, you know, he just sat down with an interview, which I thought was pretty good. So again, it's mixed feelings. Disclosure, good, yay. What's going on behind the scenes, the things I've heard, not so good. Then again, you know, of people who have gone there and participated being an asset, and they had a good experience. So it's a mixed bag for me.
I think you have to look at some of the material that has come out surrounding Skywatcher, including the old Reddit post between Jake Barber and some of the early Genesis, I guess, the beginnings of, the talk about psionics and then what that led to and what they were investigating and looking for, including the recruitment. And you have a bunch of people in the community that are saying they were abducted in childhood. And I'm not disputing that. But there's some people who have records and want to look into it and investigate it. And it's not a straightforward thing because the way that it's all been run in terms of programs is there's aspects of it that are dark, where there have been contractors who have run these programs and it's all very muddled. So when I've been looking into not Skywatcher, but people's claims about abduction in childhood, not abduction by NHI, but taken away from their family or being put into special programs to test parapsychology or these different types of anomalous experiences, there does seem to be some evidence that there were programs. And so I know that's ongoing and they're looking into the childhood programs. And I think it's been a misnomer to call it childhood abduction because that puts people into the NHI component, which is seemingly separate, but not separate when people have been raised in families where there's been a parent who was either military or intelligence or involved in some kind of aspect of the government. And so there's a lot of claims. We're not wanting for claims that people have been in a childhood program where psionics has been part of it, but it's very hard to dissect that. There are red flags from what I've seen in a couple of people who I know who I've looked into their paperwork, and there's just tons of red flags. So it's not a straightforward thing. And Linda is totally on point by saying that this has been being done for a long time and covered up for a long time. And, I just saw a post a couple days ago by a high-end researcher talking about MKUltra. So it all tends to flow into, one basket, but I don't think it is just one basket. I think it's multiple compartments, different contractors. And for people that are making the claims, there's got to be some paperwork. You can't just say stories anecdotally. Now, I am sharing my story anecdotally. It's an anecdotal story. But I'm also looking into all those things like everybody else has in terms of paperwork to try to show something that's real. And I haven't found that yet in my own personal case. I continue to work on it.
Yeah, I agree, Courtney. There seems there's so much overlap. If you look at just the MyLabs component, there's so much overlap between the alien abduction side and then the re-abduction by humans. And there's a component where the humans are actually working potentially with a different faction of NHI, and also humans working on their own. I mean, there's just so much out there to kind of sift through. But okay, I'll just get into some of the stuff that I have to say about my own experiences. And then if anybody wants to jump up and ask questions, you guys are free to interrupt anytime to keep me from rambling, ask questions. So my first time that I can recall, or that I had a conscious recall of flying a craft. I think it was in 2021, and I'm always subject to looking back into my journal and seeing the actual dates and details. So I'm just going off my memory. And this was at a time when I had no idea that anyone else was flying craft, or that there were any abductees, flying craft, or there anything like that was going on. So I'm not sure where this would have come from other than what it appeared to be. And the very first one that I remember was, I'm not sure what the shape is called, Courtney, but it was, maybe you could jump in on this. It just looked like one of these old fashioned shapes. I put it up in the nest. I put up in the nest is a post that I made August of 2023. And I put this post up because there was a remote viewer with Farsight, and as soon as she started drawing the craft on her board and started explaining what she experienced from being inside the craft as a remote viewer, it was very, very close to what had happened to me. And the craft that she drew was very close. And I was standing behind what looked like a panel with maybe 3 or 4 beings sitting at the panel. And a lot of times when I'm in the craft, which is entirely too many times, unfortunately, my vision is a lot of times it's very blurry, and I'm not getting everything. So like I explained earlier, a lot of what I'm getting is not the detail that someone like Amy is getting. So I've put Amy's account up into the nest as well. I suggest people follow her. She's putting out a lot of information right now that she's transferring over from her Gab account. She's got a lot of details on craft and what they appear to look like inside, and a lot of that kind of stuff. So I think it's pretty interesting for people. So again, I'm not getting a lot of the detail, but I was standing behind the panel, and I had a handler standing off to my right, and I was flying the craft. Now I look back on this, and my impression was that I was flying the craft. But when I look back on it, I think to myself, okay, so now I've read the abduction research. So now I can look back at it in hindsight. At the time, I didn't have that experience. And there's some research to suggest we might actually, when we're flying the craft or getting access to the craft, we might actually be getting assistance, potentially from the beings themselves. So I just want to throw that out there as just a little tidbit of possibility. So what does it take to fly a craft? I look at it as being very similar to being out of body. So if you've been out of body and you know what it takes to navigate the astral realm, to me, it's very similar to that. So it takes attention and intention, and there's an interesting fortitude component to it that comes kind of just from the core, a fortitude and a will to it. However, too much attention, you'll crash and burn. So too much attention to the process actually stops the flow of the process. Hopefully that makes sense. So on one hand, you have to have this attention and intention, but on the other hand, you have to act fairly casual, because if you don't act casual and you put too much attention into it, it just blows the whole thing. So it's been my experience at large that the ship can actually act independently of the pilot. And again, I put a post up there from this remote viewer, and she put it this way, like a horse and a rider, where the rider is guiding the horse, but the horse could actually act independently if it wanted to. And I thought that was a decent explanation. It's not the entire story, but it's a decent explanation of how it happens. So it's a partnership with the craft, and the craft appears to have its own consciousness and its own ability to do what it wants to do, or an ability at least to override the controller. So there's that. I've also been in a craft that appeared entirely sentient. And when I say sentient, I mean it had feelings, which I know sounds absolutely bizarre. So when I say sentient, I don't mean that it had a consciousness. I mean it had feelings. I was placed inside of a craft, and this craft was in an energy tube system. And this is something very strange, but they seem to use these, I call them energy tubes. I don't know what they are, but they remind me of the system at a drive-through pharmacy or at the old banks, where they would put a container into the tube and the tube would suck down and then, end up somewhere else. It reminds me of that. So I was placed inside of a craft, and as I was getting into it, I could feel its energy, and I could feel that it literally hated my guts. And I know this, again, probably most of what I say today is going to sound outrageous, and that's okay. I'm used to it. But it is what it is. So this is the first time I ever felt an absolute hatred from a craft. I got put into it. I was locked inside of it, and I could not get out of it. Now, during this period, I was fairly feisty, and I would kind of push back on these things that were happening to me. But I got into this craft, and I just prayed for my life, because I could feel that it wanted to terminate me. And it had the power, it had the ability, and it had the will, but it did not have the permission that it took to terminate me. And I knew it. And I just minded my P's and Q's while I was inside this craft, because I had never experienced anything like this before. And it shot down like in one of these energy tubes, and I was brought back. So I obviously survived that with no problem. But it was very interesting to feel the hatred and the animosity that a seemingly, and this was an unpiloted craft, a seemingly just a tool, just a conveyance, had for me. So that was super weird. I also had one night I had a very vague impression. So I was levitated into a ship, and that was the last of what I really remember. But I had a vague sense, and I wrote down in my journal, did I fly that ship? Like I feel like I flew that ship, but I don't have any memory of any details of that one. That was like a triangle looking craft, which is somewhat suspicious considering the knowledge we all have about triangles. That could have been ours, I don't know. So I've also had some interesting experiences with connecting consciousness to individual craft. So I had an experience where I was inside a helicopter, and the helicopter came off as looking like a bit of a tinker toy, and I had a pilot sitting behind me. Now, this is the only craft I've ever had to actually touch in order to connect consciously with the craft, and it had a joystick on it, and I had to touch the joystick while I was controlling the craft consciously. I had a couple of incidents of piloting a hovercraft, and this hovercraft was white. It was seamless. It was very fluid and liquidy, and that was just piloted, straight by consciousness. Let's see. There's probably a couple others here. So this is going to get into the part where this might have been for some weird black project or something, because it doesn't seem alien. Consciously piloting like a hoverboard, not a personal craft, but of just a board. And then I had a time where I was consciously piloting a pair of shoes. I know that sounds kind of nutty, but piloting a pair of shoes that had the ability to just hover over the ground. Well, that is probably not everything, but that's a lot of my experience on it.
I'm glad that you're talking and you prefaced everything that you just said, which, I mean, that's just terrifying. First of all, to be inside of a craft and have abject hatred interfaced. And I'm glad that you were ejected from it, because that's just horribly terrifying. I can add that the out-of-body experience really does seem to touch on what these, experiences embody. I mean, it's very much like an out-of-body experience. And so when I listen to what you're talking about, one of the things that it brings up is like eyewitness testimony, right? And what's legal. And we all know that a lot of these experiences, whether you call it liminal or super experience or whatever your term is, the out of body part of it is right on. After our encounter in Oregon and the months after, it wasn't just the craft and being inside the craft. A couple months later, I would say it was very similar to what you're describing, where it was an out of body experience where the wall in my bedroom became like, the best way to describe it is like translucent. And there was a portal that opened up. It was a green, fluorescent green and purple light, not like I had seen in the craft. That was more like a viscous fluid. But when the portal opened up in my bedroom during this out of body experience, it was light, like a magnetic light, bright green, bright purple. And these beings, huge beings, came through the portal, okay, in this out of body experience. And it was a dream, but yet it matters because when I was there, I was on the side of the portal. And what I would describe as light beings, huge light beings, were coming through it, and they were communicating telepathically once again. And I was very confused about why they were there, what was happening. My dad had passed away at this time frame, and he was there standing alongside of this portal. And he wasn't communicating, he was just standing there. And I was trying to communicate with him telepathically, like, what is this about? What's going on? And they were communicating about a doctor's appointment, interestingly enough, that they needed to check something. And it was all about my daughter and pregnancy. Anyway, I wasn't pregnant at the time, but yet when you go and you look into the abduction research and you look at this interference that happens, and it's somewhat out of your control because it's consciousness related. It totally, what you're describing sounds a lot like what I've experienced. Now, I haven't piloted shoes. That sounds very much like Hermes, and the shoes, the magical shoes, but there's some part of this that is like a witness testimony to what you're seeing, the encounter, what you describe. And so I think it's good that we're discussing a lot of this, even though, like I said before we came into this space, I know people are going to be incredulous. It really does get into what you encounter and what that interface looks like, and comparing notes and trying to understand these different facets of it. So I'm grateful that you shared what you shared, and some of it I have seen and heard before on your timeline and posting it. But we're all grappling with similar type of things. So I think we should maybe take some questions and see what people can share, because maybe people have similar experiences that they want to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it came to the hoverboard and the shoes, it was interesting because I was out, it appeared to be that I was out on the side of a very, very long road in the desert. And I looked at that as human. I didn't look at that as I didn't perceive that I was under alien control, if that makes any sense. And what is the story about Hermes and the shoes? I need to hear about it.
It's an ancient story. It's in the myths that he had these shoes that he could travel. They had wings on them, and he could go between the different realms. He was one of the demigods, I believe, that could travel between Olympus and the mundane reality. So, yeah, just a reference to the old mythologies. Sounds familiar.
I mean, that makes it super interesting for
Totally.
me.
There's
Okay, well,
a lot of
that's good
overlap.
info.
There's a lot of
Yeah.
overlap when you start to look at the Greek gods and mythology, and but we're talking about encounters and direct, knowledge or perceiving information from being in these out of body experiences. So that also is like, for a lot of people, wishy-washy, and they wouldn't count it, but I do.
Oh yeah, I think nobody counts what I have to say, but that's okay because I do. I think for me, I was I don't know if blessed is a good word. I was lucky. I don't know what the right word is, but it was beneficial for me to have so many of these experiences before coming into contact with any of the abduction research, because I was able to go, oh wow, okay, well that happened to somebody else too. That doesn't mean every single thing we're perceiving is 100% accurate. Obviously, these creatures are able to paralyze us and mind control us. So it would be silly to think that we have, 100% perfect recall of what's happening. But to later look at some of my experiences and then go back to the abduction research and, oh wow, this really weird, silly, off thing actually happened to someone else too. I find that very validating. Jay, just welcome to the space.
Yeah, thank you, Fringe and Courtney and Sarah. Uh, I want to ask, when you get abducted, did you get any like a lot of abductees report that they're told, we'll need you in a later date, you'll be very important, and there's disasters coming. Do you think in any way that these skills that you're learning are for those times?
For me, I have not gotten any direct communication about that. So I had my first pole shift dream download, whatever you want to call it, when I was about 15 years old, and it was a shared experience with another person. But my entire childhood, I was having cataclysmic type dreams. And then the pole shift thing. And then in my entire adulthood, I have had not only dreams in the liminal space, but I can be wide awake and I can see, I'll just get, I would call this more of a vision of what's going to happen to the earth. So during this time when all of this stuff was happening, I didn't know, I was unaware that this happens with a lot of abductees. We're shown these scenes of what could be coming. I can say that the abduction research does show that there has been communication from the aliens to abductees, and they are being told about a time when the cataclysm is going to be coming to the earth. So that's entirely possible. I mean, if they're telling the truth, there could be a cataclysm coming, and maybe they're going to, off-world some people. I don't know.
Yeah, so I can definitely say that some of what Fringe is describing, I can relate to. Definitely the sleep paralysis when I was a kid. I dealt with that. I didn't know what was going on. I would talk to my sister because sometimes we would sleep in the same bed, and I would wake up and I would say, do you have this experience where you can't move, but your eyes are open? And it was, for me, a terrifying experience. Once again, I don't talk about it too often, but, you look back to the childhood stuff and you try to relate, this timeline of all these different events and what's different about it. And, I didn't really connect the paralysis and sleep paralysis until way later, and that it might be connected. I'm still open-minded about it. In terms of the visions or prophecy, how I came into the field was not through UFOs. It was through psychic phenomena, which I had experienced in my 20s, is where it really went off. And there were definitely visions about what Jack talked about last night. Politics aside, I had seen Russian ships on the coast of California, and described that to a friend of mine at the time. That was way before the UFO encounter. But then also seeing nuclear, I've seen nuclear blasts on the East Coast, and some part of it, you don't know whether it's a vision or if it's anxiety. So I think that's where the real rubber meets the road, is that when you have somebody who's psychically oriented and they're having these visions or prophecies, all you can do is really document it. But that's how I came into the field, was through psychic experiences and looking at SRI, what they were doing. Now you have modern people talking about psionic programs and MKUltra. So I try to tease out a lot of the past visions and with what has actually happened. And that's, for me, it's still ongoing. But my kids have all had visions about nuclear explosions. And so, yeah, I definitely think there's catastrophic elements that come into play that hasn't happened. So you kind of put some of it into anxiety and worry and fear.
Did that help, Jay? Just so for me, there's not been any direct communication, but other abductees have had direct communication. Does that answer your question? And do you
Uh,
have more?
uh, no, but thank you.
Okay, I'm going to let Casey up here because I think Casey is going to bring up something that is pretty important, and that is the possibility. Well, let me just say this. There's a lot of overlap between abductees and people who have been MKUltra. We talked about it just a little while ago. And I think it's important in light of JJ's question and in light of a lot of our experiences, like what am I doing actually flying a hoverboard for the aliens? Probably not out in the middle of the desert on a long stretch of road. I don't know. But I think it's important to discuss the possibility that some of us, at least some of these experiences, could actually be for our own Black projects. And then the possibility that some of these downloads and visions could actually come from our own tech. I think that has to stay on the table. I am not one of those people who's like Greer, who says all the aliens are good and all the bad stuff is happening from humans, but nor am I the other way around. That the aliens are all bad and all the bad stuff is coming from the aliens. I happen to think it's both. So I think we have the aliens and humans working actually together. Again, possibly different factions, possibly separate and private projects as well. But I think they're working together on a lot of this. Welcome, Casey.
Hey, always good to engage in the community. And so I have a couple of questions, but I also want to share, my background, but my mother was definitely MK Ultra starting at age 16, and I was in the network. I was being groomed to become a mafia wife. She worked for the Sevilla family in Hollywood as a professional singer. And so I was repeatedly molested throughout my childhood, but I think my mother experienced more abduction scenarios. So one of the things that I want to bring awareness to is that for 29 years, I've been providing free support to survivors of all types of sexual trauma, and it overlaps the MK Ultra sexual trauma, satanic ritual abuse, organized abuse, military abuse, my labs. All of this has a lot of overlap. Now, my mother in particular was a trained honeypot, and she was very talented, but she was just one of those women that she had a diamond on every hand from a different man that was just wanted to marry her. And it was just, it was crazy. I was just like, what? So one of the things that I've learned working more and more for 29 years with people who I've never witnessed a child sacrifice, but I've listened and spent a lot of time with people who have. And the one thing that is consistent is that the Old Testament is the organizational construct of the secret society Freemasons. So, for example, the 72 Keys of Solomon are organized into the constructs and the contracts and the control mechanisms that lead back to the sovereign military bases that delineate who controls what regions and to whom those groups answer to. So I have witnessed in my lifetime so much overlap between out-of-body abductees and satanic ritual abuse survivors and MK Ultra trainees. So as crazy as it sounds when I say this, my mother, when I would put her back into a psychiatric hospital to be reprogrammed, when she would be accessed as a honeypot, she would almost always have a nervous breakdown, and I would put her back into these psychiatric wards that were controlled by the CIA. I mean, as crazy as it sounds, she was electric shock therapy treatment partner with Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. She used to call him Ricky. He was just a teenager, but you have to understand these Cedars-Sinai, these Malibu organizations are CIA organizations that are training up Black soldiers, super soldiers. So, for example, my mother, she couldn't even drive a car. She was like one of those people that, you need to send a driver for her, but they trained her and she got a pilot's license to fly an ultralight that lands on water at the Bagnell Dam. And I remember as a kid, I'm like, why are they letting my mother fly this plane? So that was, and if you do any research, do any deep dives, you'll find out the CIA mind control that is right there, situated in the Ozark Mountains. So they tend to find the ley lines of Earth where they have those energetics, and the dams are widely known as access points and stargates and wormholes to access extra dimensionals for power and control. So what I've learned in 29 years is that these individuals, be it the people that are abducting us or torturing us or raping us or programming us, they want to reign in the New World Order and to create transhumanism among humanity. So I think that's where we're at. After post-vaccination, we have a lot of people that are throwing MAC addresses, which enables them to get downloads and also to upload their consciousness. So I know that every ritual that they do at the satanic rituals is like a marriage rehearsal, I'm told, where they're required perfect role play as though the New World Order is happening today. So they can't make any mistakes. They have to wear all of their outfits. They have to walk in succession behind this person or in front of this person. They have to do everything in order. So every ritual is practice for the New World Order takedown of humanity. And I believe that we are now in the Black Awakening, judging by the survivors that I've worked with over the last 5 or 6 years. They're really having problems with being targeted by electromagnetics, which is causing sleep paralysis and out-of-body experiences. So my question is, what percentage of your abductions are out-of-body versus being taken physically, like they do with the MKUltra and the Montauk kids?
Thank you, Casey. I agree with you. There's a lot of overlap. And unfortunately, I've actually experienced the overlap. My own father was actually involved in an international human trafficking ring, et cetera, which we don't have to get into. There is a lot of overlap. And unfortunately, for the UFO community, we don't want to see the overlap, because anything that sounds more batshit crazy than we already are, and no offense, but the SRA MK Ultra community is the only one who can really beat us there. You know that. Because anyway, we don't want to accept the overlap, because we are very much disclosure minded, and even the things that I say have been deemed dangerous for disclosure. So the UFO community just wants your nuts and bolts vanilla disclosure. That's all we want. It seems, on one hand, I understand that that's where it needs to start. Like, you can't hit humanity over the head with, by the way, the aliens might be eating us for breakfast. Yeah, probably not where we want to start. But the UFO community doesn't want to hear about any of the other so-called conspiracy theories out there because of that, because of being so protective of disclosure. We don't want to start getting into the weeds and start sounding absolutely batshit. But I agree with you. There's a lot of overlap. To answer your question, I gave up some time ago trying to figure out which abductions were physical and which abductions seem to be out of body. I think a lot of mine are out of body. I do sometimes get hit, like this morning, I got hit with, okay, there was this physical sign and that physical sign, and there was a pillow on the floor, and I had hair like wrapped up in my watch, and, just a couple of weird things. I had a mark on my back, and that makes me go, okay, could that have been physical? Well, I just don't know. There have been times when, yeah, I wake up with, I've talked about this 100 times, because this has probably had the most points of interest in one at one time where I was wearing the helmet, the Velostat helmet. I woke up with the scarf on upside down or backwards. I had a bloody nose. I had a bump on my head. The camera had gone out overnight for 3.5 hours. So I look at those and go, okay, that could have been physical. And I will tell you, having talked to people like Amy, who has a lot of physical abductions still, because if you're being taken for your eggs and for the hybrid breeding program, it's still a very physical thing, at least it appears to be. And comparing notes with her, it can be very difficult to differentiate the feeling of when they put you back in the bed. There's a lot of, well, when they take you and when they put you back, there's a lot of vibration happening and there can be some noise, but it's very similar, but not exactly the same as just a regular out of body experience. During a regular out of body experience, so I could pop out of my body and walk around the etheric realm, which appears to be very similar to our realm here on Earth, but not exact, which is kind of like that liminal space between the astral space and the physical space is the etheric space. Going out of body can produce vibrations and it can produce noises and it can produce buzzing. So that has to be compared to what also happens during an abduction. So what happens during an abduction? They paralyze you. I've many times felt the body vibrations that come with an abduction. Anytime my body is vibrating, which by the way could happen just right during the middle of the day, I become suspicious of an abduction because of the vibration. So it can be hard to differentiate. Is a very long answer to your questions, but there are signs. If you look at the abduction research, and I myself have had my pants on backwards, I've had grass in my bed. If you wake up with a bloody nose or a lump on your head, I have bruises, scratches, scoop marks, you name it. Well, that seems to be very physical to me. But if you listen to researchers like Tom Montauk, there's also the possibility that what they're doing to the astral body can transfer right back to the physical body. So, but to ramble a little bit more, we do have instances of people witnessing people being levitated into ships, and it seems to be a very physical thing. So it probably doesn't answer your question. The short answer is there are times I don't know, and there are times when I can lean one way or the other. Courtney, do you have anything on that?
Oh, I wish I had statistics on the times where it was a physical abduction. Unfortunately, when I was a kid, my parents weren't tracking any of this, but it aligns with what Fringe is saying, winding up out in the driveway with no explanations. My sister and I were both found, in childhood in our lawn or driveway. You combine that with sleep paralysis and then excessive nosebleeds. I'm not just talking about small nosebleeds. I'm talking about being in school and having gushing nosebleeds, being sent to the nurse's office and then not being able to stop it, and then going to the principal's office. So yeah, I mean, I don't have any statistics on physical abductions, but I do have, records of, all those physical issues, but it's hard to connect it. And unfortunately, because of altered states, and we're talking about out of body experiences, sleep paralysis, which has been called pseudoscience when it comes to abduction research, there are no hard and fast rules. And a lot of times parents really aren't tracking this stuff in childhood. So we really don't have any statistics. I wish I did have personal statistics on the times that I went to the hospital, because there could be a timeline of events, but I didn't know that. Like I said in my other comments, most of this is going back and kind of recasting things in a new light after the UFO encounter, which didn't happen until 2015. And it was a night sighting. It wasn't a daylight sighting. So it was, once again, put into this questionable experience, which some researchers don't even count, in terms of an encounter. I do, like I said.
Yeah, exactly, Courtney. So much of this is going back. So I had the same thing as a kid. I don't think I was ever locked out of the house or anything, but I was told I must be sleepwalking. I would wake up in different places. And you know what? Sleepwalking is a real thing. People sleepwalk. It could happen. Um, oh, there was something else I was going to say, but I was investigated as an adult for something called HHT, which is a bleeding disorder because of having the nosebleeds again, like Courtney said, as a kid and also as an adult. So I think there are a lot of signs just looking at the research that shows this is a very physical thing. But there are also a lot of signs that shows it's not. I slept with a camera in my bedroom for a significant period of time. And I mean, there's an argument to be made that I would actually get up and go to the bathroom and go out of frame. There were a lot of times the camera would just shut off or not capture anything at all. But there were other times when it seemed like in my own mind, there's no way I actually physically left the environment. And yet I'm coming back with the bruises. So it gets pretty super weird. I think pretty much everything we deal with is pretty weird and it's not very clean cut. Go ahead, Casey.
Yeah, my next question is, it seems that in my world, the MKUltra Montauk process is about hybridization, where they're harvesting our sperm and our eggs. Worked with survivors that were breeders, that were they were drugged all day and required to have sex because they were identified as having being in the bloodline of Solomon. So my question is, how many of actual abductees, my son who's been abducted was a sleepwalker, had the nosebleeds, and now he's had abduction experiences as an adult. So what percentage of you guys have experienced what appears to be them harvesting our eggs or sperm, or really working on a breeding program? Because that seems to be their motivation.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I asked Jacques Vallée when I was at the Seoul conference, the first one in 2023, about statistics on abductions, and he referred me to the Guy Pan study and Cometa studies that were done early on, and he didn't have a statistic, but some. And then you have to look at statistics from just encounters, and there's a big division, in our field about the differences between abductions and encounters. And there are some subtle differences between people who have experiences and people who actually have abductions, who have encountered an entity, and then what that entity appears like. So it's very, very much a gray area. The latest statistics that I saw was a study in the UK about people who have had experiences, now not abductions, but that was 7% of the UK population. And I posted that on my timeline. I think it was about a year ago.
Thank you, Courtney. And interestingly enough, I just Googled this the other day. Apparently, about 8% of the population experiences at least one sleep paralysis incident in their lifetime. I thought that number would be much higher, but it's not. So, Casey, looking at the abduction research, and you can look at the research from researchers who believe it's like a love and light thing. They're here to upgrade our consciousness, and researchers who believe that there's a negative alien agenda. So there's at least two sides, and some people are just in the middle, right? But if you look at all of it, all of them agree that the agenda is to create these hybrids. And so I don't have a percentage as far as and I'm only talking about abductions here, not just whatever experiences are out there, but just abductions only. The entirety of the abduction program seems to be centered around creating hybrids. And that's agreed on both sides, all sides of the research. Go ahead, Casey.
Yeah, that is by far, that is what MKUltra is about. Of course, they're training super soldiers, but in every walk of that arena, be it ritual abuse, satanic ritual abuse, or MKUltra, they're breeding. They're looking for the right bloodlines to do whatever it is they're trying to do. And I will tell you that love and light, that phrase, is a trigger for MKUltra. So just as a note of caution, that those of us who have been dealing with this, I've been dealing with it my whole life. I think you have too, Fringe, from having, your family involved and so on and so forth. And my mother dragging me into this. And my brother is a very successful comedian in Hollywood. He edited The Aristocrats, and his best friend was George Carlin. And you would think that he edited The Aristocrats. It went all the way to Sundance in 2005. And you would think that he would never have gotten these vaccinations because, George Carlin was like, there's a big club and we ain't in it. But the motivation is to dumb us, to pull us away to calcify our pineal gland with parasites and heavy metal toxicity so that we come away from our awareness of how wonderful a creation that we actually are as children of God. And then to pull you into the belief system of love and light, that you can even do new age practices and you just invoke Jesus and it's all good. But I'm here to tell you that they infiltrate the churches specifically because they know especially the Old Testament, they know it better than anyone. It is a tool of manipulation for believers, and they will go out of their way to destroy. They love the Buddha, they love Muhammad, they love every religious leader, but they will destroy Jesus right in your face. They'll dress up as Jesus and torture you and rape you, and then bring demons in to rescue you from horrific circumstances. So this is something that I've heard about directly from survivors for 29 years. So I just caution you guys that the new age agenda, every time I get into a place where things are really hard for me because I absolutely refuse to capitulate. I won't go back into the network. They keep, I'd rather end up homeless under a bridge than take anything that they keep offering me, and they keep coming at me. Including my sons and I all have a rare form of muscular dystrophy that's mathematically impossible unless we were genetically manipulated. All 5 of us have Emery-Dreifuss muscular dystrophy, and it happens to be my maiden last name. So it was my mother's last name, and I was approached by someone who told me that if I had not found a way out of my mafia family, that they would have provided me with a cure, which was regenokine. And so they basically said if I would just become a new age influencer and stop talking about all this stuff, that they would heal me and my children of this deadly disease. And I've got a 37-year-old kid that's been in a wheelchair since he was 16 with, severe muscular dystrophy contractures. So it's a difficult situation, but that is their motivation. And so right now I'm watching what was always predicted was the Black Awakening, which is to get us with enough heavy metal toxicities inside our body with these MAC addresses and so forth to be able to access us and turn us into super soldiers for them to bring down humanity. So that, I believe, is what they're doing. So I'll land there, but thanks so much, and I really appreciate your spaces.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. I appreciate you, and I appreciate the awareness that you're bringing to the overlap. Once you see it, you can't unsee it, the overlap between our two communities. So thank you. I appreciate you. Courtney, how are you doing on time this morning?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay, we'll get a couple more questions up here. Let's see. We have Aiden. Aiden, welcome to the space.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to jump on real quick on Casey's thing about the super soldier stuff, because that last year in March when I left Falcon Space and Sanrail and APEC, they had me stop over in Barstow, California. They being the monitoring system, the little gray brothers, the ones the glowing vehicles over Sandia Labs that I've watched for years. But I stopped in Barstow, and then they sent in a pair of units. They put me in paralysis, and then woke me up by shaking the bed, and I had this I was in the Android unit and aware of my body at the same time. And they said they were going to use me to affect a couple Marines. And my waking consciousness was more in the dream astral realm, and I could see I wasn't allowed to look directly at the androids, but I was allowed to look down this long, like fractal repetitive corridor until I started seeing Marine barracks. And I think what all of that turned into was well, I know it's from my perspective, it was the Trump Tower bombing, and then the guy down in Louisiana with the Ford Lightning truck, because they were both former USMC, and they were suffering from survivor's guilt. I'm having problems speaking through it because I'm not supposed to talk about it, but um, so the super soldier stuff, if they're doing that, then they're just using veterans because they already have the mentality, the training with weapons, and the survivor's guilt from being in combat. Um, I don't know. I mean,
Aiden, did you use the God helmet for that, or did they just use your normal abilities?
that was a well, when the people went nuts and did um the attack. This was like in December. They left me in a state of like suicidal. I need to kill myself, but they weren't letting me get out of it. I during December, I was like nightly. I was like, you put these stem cell treatments in me, and you didn't tell me what the fuck they are. Why don't you just come back and finish me? I don't want to be part of this. So I was made to hold suicidal thoughts and tendencies for several months, and that has slowly been lifting. They come back and like, oh, we can just change your mentality. I'm like, no, you fucking can't. I'm homeless and my family's been murdered, and you guys are just using me for your mind games. My body's been genetically engineered. I think we've covered this in past spaces. I have a funny mole on my body that was put on my body while I was in my mother's womb, and so they're I guess I'm one of the special ones, or I'm definitely a human hybrid, but I don't know. I just wanted to add a couple cents to the super soldier thing. It's not going to be your average, it's not going to be an egg donor. It's not going to be some like super athlete. The people that the non-human intelligence influence on our society is going to use for retribution would be, former veterans here in the United States, and I think that's all I wanted to add to this at the moment.
Thank you, Aiden. Yeah, you bring up something that I tried to talk to Dodie about the other day, and so I'll just give you my perspective on this. So I know you've talked about having to wear the God helmet and all the stuff that comes with that, and there are many others out there as well.
Mm-hmm.
There is an aspect to this where the government went from, and I say government loosely. When I say government, I mean everything from our own, dark military projects to, Raytheon and whatever they might be doing. We went from remote viewing to this TPA thing, and after the TPA project, I think, at least by now, and I think it started quite some time ago, that they're actually able to transfer your consciousness into someone else's body, looking out of someone else's eyes. And I think that they're using this as some kind of a spy program. It gets pretty weird. I don't know if you've experienced that, Aiden, but what you just talked about sounded very similar. Did we lose Aiden, or did we lose me, Courtney?
Yeah, no, I think there were a couple people lined up for other questions. I see like 4 more people requesting. So I don't know if Aiden had a follow-up or if he wanted us to move on to the next question.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we might have lost him.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Lori? Oh, we might be losing Lori too. We might have a connection problem here. All right, Aiden and Lori, you're probably going to have to drop down and come back up. Sugar, welcome to the space. Lori, you're probably going to have to drop down.
Thank you. I have a question about the brain computer interfaces, droids or drones that they release to the public, where we would control the small drones to move around. Um, so we do have the ability to use our frequencies and to move things. What I'm curious about, especially if, and I don't want to put you on the spot, French, but I know you posted a picture of your tinfoil hat as a Faraday cage. Do you think that perhaps the God helmet would read our what is would I'm sorry, influence frequencies upon us to have us see or experience things? Do you think when you wear a Faraday cage, do you think that dampers your ability to also communicate outward? That maybe you experience these things because you're so in tune with your frequencies that even when you're sleeping, you're transmitting something. And that is like a conduit to this communication you're receiving. That you have such a heightened ability of this, even when you're sleeping, that you're still transmitting outward, even wearing a Faraday cage. Um, because I think communication would be in two ways. Just like we could control a drone, one of those brain computer interface drones. I think even using something like a tinfoil hat, um, that we're still able to transmit things outwards. Do you think that people that are experiencing this are conduits because of their heightened ability to transmit frequencies?
I think we are conduits. I think we're some kind of, reception receiver, some kind of an antenna for the phenomenon. And when it comes to that helmet, I went through phases of thinking it might even be enhancing certain things. So the properties of the helmet were supposed to actually stop physical abductions. And if Amy at Abductee Journal did a lot of research on that material, and when she finally pinned it to her clothes is when it started being effective for physical abductions. But there were times, gosh, I don't want to get long involved into my own story, but after one of the most horrific things that has ever happened to me, I started wearing this helmet. But they were coming relentlessly for days, and I could feel them accessing the back of my head with frequencies. I could feel the vibration in the back of my head where they were targeting me to try to get me either out of my body or to do a physical abduction, and I might never know which that's going to be. So there
That's
were times when I felt like it might be protecting me, and it turned out that it was just a security blanket for me to try to get some sleep. But there were times when I felt like it was maybe protecting me, but there were other times when I felt like it might be actually enhancing things or even enhancing my own perception of things.
That's what I was going to ask you if it did enhance it because, again, I can't remember the creator of the God helmet, but I remember at one point he was selling it to the general public, and I don't remember how much it cost or anything, but it was within uh, a range that if you were really interested, you could purchase one and use it at your home. And I was wondering if that was creating like some type of magnetosphere around people that even when they have the helmet off, or in your case, the Faraday cage off, that dampering that had happened is now overly exposed and it's causing a higher rate transmission afterwards.
Are
It's
you
an interesting
talking about
concept. Go ahead, Courtney.
are you talking about Michael Persinger and the Shakti helmet, or is this a different
I think
technology?
it's a different technology. This one was something comparable to an EKG. It was there were little diodes in your you place on your scalp, and in that helmet, um, with certain frequencies, it could induce the wearer to feel as if there was something in the room, and people without faith would even feel that they had holy experiences. it was based on some type of electric frequency that was being used. It was, I don't remember what university, but I feel like it was in Canada, and it was actually called the God helmet. But the commercial version of it was something that the creator, ended up um, distributing as a method to, I think, get the idea out. But I was curious if that was maybe to create a collective.
Well, there's been a bunch of studies in psychophysiology around different consciousness and even in surgery, using different types of, surgery to work with consciousness and kind of hone in on the different areas where people are awake. And there have been several studies, I know, just in the last couple years, especially out of Philadelphia, about prayer and different types of consciousness. So I'm not aware of the actual God helmet that you're referencing, but if you would put that into the nest, if you can find it. I've heard it referenced as a God helmet, but I've also heard it referenced as the Shakti helmet. So I think that would probably be good to tease out which is which.
I'll do that. Thank you so much. I'll step down also.
Thank you, Sugar. Yeah, it's pretty interesting that you're bringing that up. I was not aware that that there was some commercial product. When I spoke to Aiden about the God helmet, I was referring to Aiden's own experiences where they were actually putting a helmet on his head. I think it was metal. And I've heard of other experiencers talk about this as well. And it's just loosely called the God helmet. So, wow, I didn't even know that it might be available out there. But yes, I have definitely considered the possibility that that material was actually enhancing my awareness of some of my experiences. So, thank you for that question. We will bring up, I don't know how to say your name, Diva Irony. We'll see what he's got or she's got. Do you want to pronounce your name for me, Diva Irony?
I think they dropped. I don't see them, so they may have connection issues.
Yeah, we might have some connection issues there. Diva Irony, I see you as a speaker, but maybe you're not. You might have to drop down and come back up. And we'll welcome Miss McGillicuddy to the space.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Fringe and Courtney and Casey for having this space. My question is, in my experiences, I I'm a survivor of traumatic abuse and there have disassociative tendencies. And in my experience, though, with the this phenomenon, I am a soldier. Like I have knowledge of knives and weapons that I don't remember, in my waking life ever. I'm utilized in war scenarios, preparing for battle, um, and where I'm feeling more and more, and I kind of felt through my own research. It's along the lines of what Casey's talking about in regards to this. There's no lines in between these phenomenons of MK and traumatic abuse, as well, and the UFO community of these. Like when I came to the UFO space myself, I was the entities that would come for me were the demonic and shadowy and witches and things like that, and with black eyes. They always had black eyes, but all of the experiences I was having, from being raped to being in a war scenario, fighting, telepathy, all these things, they just looked different than what was on the UFO side if you were to put a brand on it. But it was the same thing that was happening. I was having these crazy things occurring with, like I said, being like a soldier or some assassin or something, and then uh, fighting in quote unquote the liminal space, but waking up with bruises in the spots where I was having been grabbed or hit or having marks and cuts uh, and of course, just like the UFO community, tried to videotape, never could get anything. Um, and I'm wondering, I guess my question is probably for all three of you. If it is quote unquote similar to the Black Awakening, Casey specifically, then, and I'm obviously not, I'm not a veteran, um, but I do come from a bloodline, two bloodlines, and I have other experiences in the family. So I'm wondering, what do you think about, and have any of you experienced being this kind of warrior? And nobody told me in these liminal places, but there's this inner knowing that that I'm preparing, I'm being trained for what's coming. It's like an inner knowing. Nothing around me ever said it. It's just this inner knowing of like, well, I got to, this is where I fight essentially. Um, what are your have any of you experienced that same thing? And what is? I'd like to know your take on that.
Yes, unfortunately, yes. I experience exactly what you're talking about. Um, I look at it, I try to look at my experiences as training, although some of it doesn't come off as training. Some of it actually comes off as much worse than that. And yeah, there's this whole idea that one side or the other, or potentially both sides, are creating super soldiers. And it sounds ridiculous, especially coming from two females. But yeah, I hear you, Miss McGillicuddy. Are you getting the impression that this is human or alien? I think you're leaning toward human.
I feel like just because of that experience that I had after my dad passed, um, where his body was there, and um, but he was, he couldn't help me, and the entity, which showed itself as a gray, said to me in telepathically, he can't help you now. And then all of a sudden he was like a skeleton and just like disappeared. There's the I know for I don't know, I mean, I think for sure that there's 100% from my own experience with trauma and abuse, is there's humans involved. I think, hey, this is like the pharaohs making deals with entities. um, so, and if you know anything about ritualistic abuse or traumatic abuse of any kind, there's a darker, there's something influencing these people to do so. um, I think it's both physical and very spiritual, for lack of a better word. And um, I do believe that there, it's not that I never believed in aliens, but there are other entities. I've seen them. I've seen them. My kids have seen them. They still do. And now, if it's like I think it's an all of the above. I think it's entities. I think it's spiritual. I think it's a combination in the center. Whether that's my labs or um, whatever name you want to put on it. That's the joint in the center. I think for sure. I think it's both, because that's why I brought up the fair. The. I mean, just look any look into any even short dive into the ancient mystery schools, and you'll see that it's both very physical and spiritual. I mean, that's alchemy, right? So I think it's both. I think it's both. I've experienced both, um, and the fact that both sides, and I only say sides, I don't think they're sides, but the MK and trauma abuse and UFO abductees were experiencing a very uh, similar song, right? Um, Maybe slightly different instruments on each side, but it's yeah, I think it's both.
Thank you. And yeah, I use the term alien very loosely. I actually don't think they're from other planets, but that's just my personal opinion. I know you. Go ahead, Courtney. I was going to let Casey back up because your question was actually also for Casey, Miss McGillicuddy. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I think that there are those of us who have been, whether it's being jettisoned out of body, or it's through near-death experience, or it's through trauma and dissociation from family bloodlines with a lot of intergenerational trauma. I think it's all connected. And there are those of us who have definitely been in the liminal space where we're fighting, and I can say yes to that. Um, I've talked with Fringe about this a long time ago, actually, about the different sides and factions, and it seems to be a spiritual thing for me, just speaking for myself. But not weapons like prosaic weapons, they're ancient weapons that I've myself been, in this out of body experience fighting the war. And it hasn't been through guns or knives or anything like that, but through lightning. So I wanted to bring up a couple of things that this is from the UFO community specifically, but after the encounter, I see Bob is in the listening space, so I'm going to mention this. I contacted Chris Bledsoe personally because after the encounter, somebody said, contact Chris about this, which I did. And he asked about the timeline of events, about what happened in 2015. And he asked me if there was a death, if someone near me had died. And yes, 2 deaths actually happened right before we went to Oregon. A good friend of mine, I guess it's unlived himself. So when we arrived in Montana from Alaska, a good friend of ours had passed. So when we got into Livingston, Montana, everybody was in just grief. And we were here for about a week, and then we went to Oregon. We left late because of the funeral and everything. So Chris pointed that out. I lost a good friend right before we saw the orbs, and then my dad died, shortly after. So Chris's interpretation when I contacted him was that, for some reason, there seemed to be a foothold that is established with the next generation of experiencers. And so I certainly did seem to fit in that mold because I had this experience with my daughter. So there was 3 generations of experiencers. And then my dad died shortly after. So I don't know if Bob wants to comment on that at all, if he has any further information, but when the afterlife comes up and encounters, there's definitely a clear connection in the family.
Thank you, Courtney. We'll let Casey answer Miss McGillicuddy as well.
Yeah, I thought your space crashed because I was just booted right out. So I was like, yeah, that happens.
Yeah, we had a couple people who actually couldn't get approved. They were just in the liminal space of spaces.
Yeah, so yeah, I was going to share that also my mother, her her aunt bloodline, and now my son's been abducted, so they definitely target the bloodlines. I also want to share that when someone identifies themselves as a remote viewer, be cautious, because what's happening is that we're all viewing through electronic heavy metal toxicity in our own bodies. We're viewing a supercomputer that they want us all to view. They want us to be able to view that so that we're intrigued by it, so that we can get the downloads and get connected. Because what they managed to do with me and all 5 of my kids is to implant internal defibrillators. And of course, they all have access to the cloud. I sleep with a giant magnet. Also, if you think your microwave is a Faraday cage, put your phone in it; it'll still ring. It's a household good that they had us all put in our homes that leaks radiation at us. So, someone had mentioned earlier something about the research. And one thing I want to share with this room is that the researchers are like Stanford Research Institute. Those are the people that are running MKUltra programs. So be very leery of them. Of course, they've identified that super soldiers like us, we have photographic memory, up to 44 times visual acuity, enhanced stamina, psionic abilities. So when I wasn't being trafficked to Dean Martin while my mom was singing with Frank Sinatra, who's now been exposed as the head of the Rat Pack, working for the FBI, to bring the Italian and the Jewish mafias under the control for blackmail. It's all one big network, is what I'm trying to say. We are all just different sides of the same coin, and the degrees of separation is how they accomplished the enslavement of humanity, because as Fringe was pointing out, if you talk about MKUltra, then the UFO experiencers think you're batshit crazy. But in the MKUltra, we're at least experiencing physical molestation, rape, and torture, and so on and so forth. So, we all think that the UFO community is batshit crazy. And that's by design. They don't want us to actually share, to swap notes, and to realize that we're all being attacked by the same network of wicked individuals. And, I have spoken to many, many people. I've done a space with Fringe and others where many of my survivors many survivors that I've worked with will say that the torturer will shapeshift. And sometimes they look humanoid. So they've identified torturers that look like they might be part whale or dolphin or wolves. And a lot of the super soldiers, such as Nathan Reynolds, who's if you don't know who he is, I encourage you. He defected from the Reynolds dynasty, and he describes his family as radically intelligent evil, descendants from the great rulers that believe themselves to have the divine right of rule over others. So if you just think about the science of the stem cells that the gentleman who was talking when I got booted out of the space, I wish I could have heard the rest of his story because I missed the middle part of it. So what they're doing with the stem cells is like with the mRNA and the vaccines, they're causing your DNA to reawaken so that normally you reach adulthood and you stop growing. Well, if you're of that bloodline that's the cannibal bloodline that consumes the stem cells and the granular secretions of children, then it reactivates your DNA. So that's how they get so tall. That's how their heads continue to expand. They believe themselves to be descendant from the rulers that give them the right to rule over us without any concern for our well-being whatsoever. So in my experience, when they pretend to be working for the good, they're very deceptive. If they make you a promise, they will break it, but they can appear very beautiful and convincing and cunning and manipulative. And then people will buy right into it, and then you'll take it up the backside. They will screw you over. So I personally believe that after speaking to a number of super soldiers, and I am like the person that was just speaking, my kids will even say, "My God, Mom, where do you get your energy? You never get tired." I ride my bike 50 miles a week. I'm just like, I am a superhuman, and I can't explain why. And when I say shit like that, people will go, "Oh, you're just bragging." I'm like, no, I'm trying to say that I'm very in touch with my female side, my masculine side. I could do a man's job, a woman's job. I can be the mom, the dad. I raised 5 kids with disabilities without, and nobody even noticed that it was exhausting, and death almost killed me because I had this hyper vigilant energy that they implanted in me, and the psionic abilities, because when I wasn't being trafficked around Hollywood to be used as a sex toy or a little arm candy for the rich and famous, then I was dropped in foster care, where I was also mistreated and molested or used as a slave, as a house slave or otherwise. So from all of that trauma, they do create in us super soldier capabilities where we've been through so much, we become badasses. And I don't apologize for that. It just is. So be careful, because a lot of times in these Stanford Research Institute, they will come forward and they'll say, "Oh, you are so special. You're so wonderful. You're so capable. You're one of the special ones." They do that when they want to entice you into some sort of a nefarious plan to hurt your fellow man. And that, again, is the Black Awakening. And it's designed, if you don't know that it's happening, look back at 2020 and all those people that took to the streets and burned the Black community to the ground, and they still haven't rebuilt it. So I'll end there, and thanks so much for letting me be a part of your space.
Hey, thanks, Casey. I'm thinking about just ditching, the whole UFO community and jumping in with you guys. I want to just we'll just welcome Linda back up. Go ahead, Linda, and we have some other speakers as well. We have not forgotten about you. Go ahead, Linda.
You can go ahead. I was trying to speak earlier and wasn't able to.
Okay, so I'm going to assume Miss McGillicuddy wants to respond to Casey, and then we have Devirony, and then we'll go to John.
Hi. Yeah, I did. Thank you, Casey, for that. Last question. Do you think, Casey, that is why in the um, experience I had after my dad passed, that because I used to years ago I used to meditate and channel and automatic write. I don't do any of that anymore. And I have refused. I kept getting these nudges, these downloads to go communicate. Just go see what they want to say. We need to talk to you. Everything from being wanting them to have me talk to orbs or just meditate. And I refused, right? But in that situation after my dad died, they kept false awakening me in the liminal space and would not let they told me in my mind, you know what you're supposed to be doing. And I knew that was they wanted me to meditate, and I said no, I'm not going to. And after a little bit of punching them in the face a few times, that I just knew, okay, fine. And when I did, um, it was like you talked about, Courtney, with that like viscous. It was like I was pulled through like a womp. So the sound I heard in my ears, like it was viscous water, bubbly thing into I don't know, maybe it was a craft, but it was a big white room. White, no real definition of walls though, but it was all white. But Casey, do you think that because in my waking am non-compliant, I mean, shoot, maybe they're doing it, like Fringe said, even when I'm awake, and I don't know because of the vibration thing, I get that too. Do you think that that's, it's like what you're talking about, where they're wanting me to, essentially be reaccessed in that nature with the psionics?
Yeah, may I answer her directly, Fringe?
Oh, absolutely. Go right ahead.
Yes, absolutely. So what they do is, especially if you experience the death of a loved one, then they use that as an opportunity to try to entice you into the world of mediumship and channeling. And they truly are, whether they're aliens or demons, they are waiting for you to reach out to your loved one so that they can pull you into that realm. And they will, I've had so many survivors say to me like, oh, Casey, don't even say that to me. It's not a popular opinion. Because this happened to me as well. My dad, so I had all these years of therapy, 12 years of therapy before I ever started helping others. And then 29 years of, spending 25 hours every week in communication with actual survivors. And in 2016, my primary rapist, my mom's brother, died, and then my father died. And so, of course, I was thrilled when my rapist died, but I was sad when my father died because for obvious reasons. So they came and offered me so much power. Like I started dabbling in mediumship and channeling and tarot cards. There were angel cards, and I was like, oh, this is great because they're angel cards and they're all biblically based. Bullshit. It's 72 cards that are all on the 72 keys of Solomon. And this is the Luciferian Brotherhood. They have hijacked the Old Testament for their radical control of humanity. And so they use the New Age practices. So if you want to meditate, you want to do yoga, that's fine. But do know that you are opening yourself up to the spiritual realm of entities that wish us harm. They do not love Creator. They do not love us. And they are very cunning and manipulative. They will appear as your dead loved one. They will give you information about your future. And that's why there's so much talk about how time travel and this and that. Like, honestly, do we really want to live in a world where you can time travel and go back and forth and split the timelines and fly around in a spaceship? To me, I would rather not exist on a planet where that is life, because that is Star Wars. They want us with all of that predictive programming in Hollywood, which is by design. They want us to want to live like the Jetsons, and they say, "Oh, this is real." No, those are hybrid programs where they have hybridized humanity. So it's not an accident that Ghislaine Maxwell was trying to take over. She was a citizen of Terramar, which is a citizen of the sea. So they want to hybridize humanity with virtually every sea creature. And are sea creatures remarkable? Yes, they're magical. But I can tell you that super soldiers like Nathan Reynolds will tell you that he's been augmented with wolf DNA. He's been augmented with beluga whale DNA. Why do you think the rich and famous consume beluga caviar? If they're going to consume some stem cells with that beluga caviar, what's going to happen is it's going to increase their abilities. It's going to thicken their skin to be able to handle the very cold temperatures, and like the beluga whales, and it's going to enhance their echolocation. So they're going to be able to be dropped in nature and be able to find their way into and out of deep tundras. And these bloodline families do come from Finland and Sweden and Switzerland. So once you know what's really going on, I know that I'm saying a lot, but in summary, please, please, please be very, very cautious about using the psionic abilities. Do we have them? Yes, we are children of God, but they are not to be used extra-dimensionally, be it with aliens or demons, because they will not have your best interest at heart, and they do have destruction at their goal of humanity, because they hate God's children. They hate our goodness. They hate our ability to love, and they hate our ability to create life. I'll land there.
Casey, I appreciate you. I really do. You sound like me, only on the MK Ultra side. Stop meditating. And people say, "Oh, you just want you don't want to expand your own human rights and your own human abilities." No, because it gives them access to you. That's why. It's a double-edged sword. Okay, there's a question regarding, and this is for you, Casey, regarding fake or counter intel super soldiers. Have you heard of such a thing?
Yes. So for the Counter Intel Super Soldier program, it is designed specifically to identify your weaknesses. If you're super soldier material, it will identify your weaknesses and send out a group of counterintelligence super soldiers to disable you. And people will call them handlers. The true story, Fringe, I'm not shitting you when I say this weekend, I encountered this guy. He says, "Oh, you live in Newport Beach. I was on the island. So there's in Newport Beach where I live, there's a lot of very, very wealthy people on the other side where all the yachts are." And he described this guy that owns this beautiful mansion over there, and that he was the one that funded the London Bridge being taken down out of London and brought to Lake Havasu. And this guy just walked out of nowhere, essentially, or from my perspective, he came out of nowhere, but he was obviously attempting to handle me. I immediately looked at him. I said my prayer to my Heavenly Father and service of Yeshua, Jesus Christ. And then I looked at him and I said, "Do you know what you're talking about? You are talking about a spiritually charged object from London Bridge that we know contained the remains of at least 80 children that were sacrificed by their parents for wealth in London. And yes, it was disassembled and brought to Lake Havasu." Have you ever listened to Nathan Reynolds, who talks about this as being a charged object that was brought to Lake Havasu, which is a city that is established as a R&R, a place for all of these high-ranking military individuals and others to go and vacation? And it looks like a place where men are just walking around with their grandsons. And no, these children are all being raped by their grandfathers. So this is just a group of pedophiles that hang out around this charged object, the London Bridge. So there's a lot of deep rabbit holes, and I've gone down so many of them that you know, I know things that will make me sound absolutely batshit crazy.
Oh no, Casey, you're already there. You don't have to go any. You don't have to go anywhere else. You're already in the batshit crazy zone. That's okay. All right. So, Divirony, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Yeah. Welcome to the space. Go
Oh,
ahead.
thanks. Yeah, I was going to bring up Nathan Reynolds earlier too, in terms of just the hysterical or not so hysterical irony of his name, right? With your God helmet and tinfoil, like, and the fact that his name, his family heritage is tinfoil, aluminum, like Reynolds wrap. Anyways, I don't know how that plays in, but it makes me laugh. Anyways, so my question, I got a couple comments and a question about the pole shift. So that Ben Davidson down in Colorado Springs seems to think it happens every 12,000 years, but from a young Earth creation perspective, if Earth has been here for 6,000 years, then where are all these other cataclysms happening? So that's my question there. And then back to the Hermes shoes. Have you heard Tillman Alberino talking about that abductions in Peru where they had like that Spider-Man Green Goblin suits, and with the Hermes shoes, basically they were flying on hoverboards. I don't know if you had any insight into either of those things. I think that's yeah. So mainly the pole shift thing, I think it's super interesting, but I don't know, what how real it is or the evidence for it, how real it is. Like I believe the way he lays it out, the mechanism of it all seems scientifically legit. It's just the time frame of all the other pole shift events that I have a question about.
Oh, those are great questions. Yes, I have seen the Alberino stuff. As a matter of fact, I went, oh, wow, okay. Yeah, I think on the Alberino stuff in Peru, they were actually on the hoverboards. I'm not sure if they were using the shoes, but it seemed to be that they were on the hoverboards when they caught that young girl. You correct me if I'm wrong. And then on the pole shift stuff, so I can appreciate the young Earth creationist. I'm more of an old Earth creationist, but I have been pointed to a couple of places in Genesis that there's a possibility that what it actually says is the Earth became without form and void. And there's this idea that there might have actually been some type of war in heaven or a pole shift or something that made the earth become without form and void rather than it was without form and void. I don't know. I'm just saying what I've heard about different pieces of the language, and how some of this is lost on translation. So I could go either way. I could go with a deception aspect to this, or I could go with, yep, this happens every 12, or some people think it's every 6,000 years. But I think the evidence for having some type of ancient civilizations around the earth, I think it's there. So I'm okay with it. Maybe this happens every 6,000 years or every 12,000 years. I don't know.
Gotcha. Yeah, like it speaks. Job speaks of Rahab, right? Like so speaking of, yeah, I'm not so open-minded that my brain falls out, but I'm not so, what's that word? Dogmatic that I'm going to yell and fight and argue with folks over stuff we have no idea about. So then my other question, speaking of Rahab, though, what about Mars? What's your take on Mars and portals and like the Doom video games? I mean, the Doom video games have been doing this crap since the 90s, right? I mean, this is wild.
Mars, yeah. I mean, I look at that as a possibility. I think there's a lot of stuff that we just don't know. Portals, yes. I've jumped through portals myself, so I do believe in portals. I think there's a lot there. To support the whole portal thing. Mars, you have the Brandenburg stuff where it seems like there could have been some kind of nuclear catastrophe on Mars. You have people like Giorgiani who think that there was actually a society on Mars and then they came to Earth. Yeah, I mean, I'm open to all of that stuff. I just don't know. I don't know what the truth is there. And what I always hold on to, though, is these creatures have a way of manipulating us, and there's a lot of deception. And a lot of these ideas about time travel and the Mars stuff and all of the other stuff, frankly, all of it, is coming from downloads. It's coming from influence from the astral realm, from where these creatures reside. So I always keep that in mind as well. Courtney, do you have anything on any of those questions?
Oh, I think that it was in Peru. When you're talking about the hoverboards that were being used, there was a village in Peru where it was called the face peelers. It was last year, and I think it was like in maybe July, I'm thinking, where there was this incident that happened where hoverboards were used, and they brought in some indigenous folks to talk to them about this whole incident and get the traditional cultural standpoint. And I believe they were talking about in their own cultural history about these incidents happening, and they talked about these different beings that came up from the earth, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what you're talking about, Peru.
That sounds about right. I think he's dropped back down. Yeah, that sounds right. That was a horrific incident that happened there with that young woman. Terrified the whole village, and I think she's not the only one, right? It seems like it's happening a lot. They seem to be targeted down there. Okay, we lost him, so we'll go to, who do we have? We have John, and then I think Linda, and then we'll get a couple others up here. Courtney, how are you doing on time?
Yeah, I'm okay.
John, welcome to the space.
Good morning, Fringe, or afternoon, as it were. Wow, what a space. I work nights. I woke up and popped into the space, and, it just instantly was triggering me because, many of you know some of my story, and so much of what we're talking about today resonates with me so deeply because I've experienced much of it. And I'm on my way to work now, so I don't want to talk about my personal experiences, even though I'm feeling compelled, because I did that a lot yesterday and it was very intense. And I don't want to go into my work, basically PTSD triggered about my personal experiences, loss, trauma, abductions, whatever. So this is, you guys always go deep. I really appreciate and love you guys for that. It's good to see Courtney back around. Haven't seen you in a while, Courtney. And Casey and some of these others I'm not as familiar with, but wow, powerful stuff this morning. And, but a couple things that, now for some people in the room, this will be a broken record. I've been talking about it all week, but, I've been thinking a lot about how they use the media, the government uses the media to sort of prep the battlefield, as it were, to prepare people for, contact or, whatever's coming. And, so in several spaces this week, we've been kind of talking about, who in Hollywood's kind of read in, who's, what movies and TV shows and things are kind of the most accurate or bringing up similar topics that we talk about all day long. And of course, Spielberg always comes to mind. And I wanted to ask the two of you guys, and of course anybody else who wants, but if you had ever seen the 2002 series that's produced by Spielberg called Taken, which is all about generational abductions and the cover-up and psionics and hybridization and shape shifting and thought projection and how to block the abductions. Everything you guys were talking about that when I popped into the space is all featured very prominently in this series Taken, which is a 10-part miniseries with like 2-hour episodes each episode, and they dive deep into the lore and the history. And this thing's 23 years old, and then once it aired, it kind of just disappeared. I felt like it was so close to true that it was too close, and so they kind of buried it. But I just wanted to know, A, if you guys have seen it and what you think about the how it pertains to the topic that we're talking about here today.
Yeah, I was warned about it actually. It was about 6 months ago, and somebody saw it. It was referenced in the community, and so I was warned about it because of that reason of how triggering it is. And I do want to watch it, but I want to be prepared for it, and arm myself before I see it. But yeah, I've heard about it, and it's been very triggering actually for a lot of people.
And oh, go ahead, John.
No, go ahead.
I have seen it. I thought it was phenomenal. I thought it was a little slow rolling, but it was phenomenal. And I was told, hey, if you want disclosure, just watch Taken, and yeah, it's all right there.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is triggering. Some of the things that Casey was talking about, I mean, they're straight out of there. I mean, it is, it follows 3 generations of families who are involved in the phenomena. One family is, a military IC family who's, part of the cover up, kind of the darker aspects of it. And then you have a family of experiencers who experience the scary, terrifying side of it. And then you have sort of the woo, love and light side of it family who they actually feel like these entities are their protectors and and are helping them, and it is very intense. It's very triggering, but it's so relevant for the conversations that we have in these spaces. And it was kind of blew me away that when I was talking about it earlier in the week, so many people in our community had never seen it, were completely unaware of it, because they kind of scrubbed it. It never went to streaming. It never went to any services. It just, I feel like it was too much, and they were like, wow, okay, this is a little too hardcore. Let's put it away. But it's out there now. If you go to my page, I have a link to a guy went out and spent the time to AI remaster everything up to 4K because it wasn't high def back in 2002. And so the whole series is now available for free on YouTube, AI remastered. And I'm co-hosting a space with Waboss this Friday night where we're going to break down episodes 1 and 2 and really talk about the Easter eggs in there, how close is it to history, how does it connect to what we're talking about today, every day in these spaces and here on X. I just want anyone to watch the episodes, come join, talk about it. But like Courtney said, I mean, if you are an abductee or experiencer, contactee, trigger warning for sure, because it's pretty intense. I mean, it goes deep, but and it is Spielberg, so at times it's schlocky and a little bit silly. But I think overall, when I look at all of the different movies and television shows that have been done. I mean, of course, X-Files, but I feel like this one is really the closest that's ever got. And we actually, Sarfati brought up last night that he believes Steven Spielberg was fully read in. And then even I asked Dodie the other night what 2 products he thought were closest in the media sphere, and he said the movie The Arrival, the one with Amy Adams, and he brought up Taken. So I just, if you want a little bit of entertainment, but you also just want to sort of dissect something interesting while you're looking for something to watch on this topic, I recommend that. Other than that, I didn't want to talk about the real stuff, my personal stuff, because that talk about triggering. So I just really love you girls. I appreciate your spaces always. I'm glad you're here talking today. And piloting UFOs is in this. I mean, everything you guys were talking about, they're talking about in this series, which, I mean, it just blows me away that people in the community don't know about it and that they were really even allowed to produce that series,
Yeah, it's a great show, and I was told ahead of time, like, hey, if you want to know everything about everything there was to know, watch Taken, and it's definitely there. I want to throw one more show out there since we're talking about shows. Go ahead and post your space, John, so everybody knows where to find it. And then, so you talked about Taken, and then somebody said The Arrival. I want to point out that Ganga posted the other day to watch The Colony, and that's available on Amazon Prime. And if I listen to anyone in this community, as far as the knowledge of the NHI, it's going to be Ganga. So I want to throw that one out there as well. Linda, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to say, um, I do not ever watch any of the science fiction stuff or shows like that, and I do that for multiple reasons, including not to contaminate my memories, my recall, and not to contaminate research that I do. And so it's fine if somebody else, but I also have enough very real um out there stuff that I've gone through that I don't need to experience somebody else's ideas about it.
Understandable for sure. Okay, Casey, go ahead.
Sorry about that. The connection wasn't letting my mic go on. Yeah, I do that as just for entertainment purposes now. I just go watch the old Hollywood films and do decodes on them. So I have not seen Taken, but I can tell you that Steven Spielberg is a high-ranking warlock in the Satanic Network. He has he's involved at a very, very high level, right up there with Oprah and LeBron James. They definitely need psionics to pilot certain craft because the human body can only handle like a certain amount of G-force, and so that is their agenda, to try to break out extra dimensionally. But if you want to understand just how evil Hollywood truly is, and it's because I grew up in it, I can tell you that it truly is, but every day I'm like, oh my God, it's worse than even I thought. Go watch LA Confidential. Because what it does is it shows you how the government got jealous of the mafias because of their power, and then set up those RICO laws so that they could take out the mafia because they were competing with them. And the mafias were established specifically to compete with the corrupt governments because they could tell that there was a shadow government. And so, of course, that's why they came from Italy, because the Vatican II is controlled at the top of that network. So in Hollywood, it is scientifically proven that most of the A-listers are cousins of one another, and most of them grew up as godchildren with other Hollywood A-listers. Some were sacrificed by their family members, meaning that they got to pretend that someone in their life died, and then they get all of that Lucius energy from everybody saying, oh, you poor thing, you had this person, this person you lost. But really, these loved ones tend to go live with other families. And you can just you could Google it. Go look up Godfather Children in Hollywood. So what they're doing is they have a breeding program going on in Hollywood where they're trying to create intersex individuals that are born with 46 chromosomes, meaning 23XX and 23XY. That's the whole goal behind IVF fertilization, is to, as we know, that Hitler was consumed with the notion of creating twins and triplets. If you want super soldiers, like if you ever heard of Svali, who was a super soldier in the Satanic Network, she was one of 3 individuals. So she had her French presentation, her German presentation, and her Italian presentation that were all her siblings, copies of herself, whether they were clones or triplets. But this is what they do in Hollywood. It's once they figured out IVF fertilization and they had a Planned Parenthood on every street corner, they had a ready supply of the stem cells that would create this issue. So if the child, so we know Anthony Kidman, Nicole Kidman's dad, is a high-ranking Rosicrucian Satanist, and Fiona Barnett has a lot of corroborating evidence that's even been in our Congress about being abused by Nicole and her father, it doesn't take long to look at Nicole and figure out that she was born male and Tom Cruise was born female, and they transition these individuals. And the reason that it's so easily done and convincingly done is because they're intersex, like Lady Gaga, who will tell you that, I don't know, do you guys really care if I have a penis? So when the child is born, they can do this in utero. If they have 23XX and 23XY, they can expose them to a certain hormone and cause them to present as one sex or the other. But because it's a Luciferian agenda, they wait to see if the child presents with male genitalia. Oftentimes they'll still have ovums, or if they present with female genitalia, oftentimes they still have testes. So they can introduce that hormone and produce a very convincing transition child. So that's why you see so many trans children in Hollywood, because it's required to be in the club. And if you really, if you think, oh, Hollywood's bad, well, let me just tell you, Hollywood is inherently at the top levels of control. It is 100% controlled by the Luciferian Brotherhood, and I'm not exaggerating. So I could tell you detailed stories of the bloodline families, where they work, what families are associated with whom. I've done all of this research over the last 30 years, 40 years. But when they tell us, what happened on our earth 6,000 years ago, you have to ask yourself a question. Most of us can barely remember what we had for lunch yesterday. And they've been lying to us about our history forever. But all of a sudden, they know exactly what happens to Earth every 6,000 years, because there's a lot of evidence to show that dinosaurs weren't actually dinosaurs, that they were actually hybrid dragons that they were using for war purposes. And many people who are in these underground bases will report that and that includes Nathan Reynolds, he will report that he's actually seen a dragon, and so has Jesse Saboter. So, in fact, Jesse Saboter was married to Satan the dragon. So is Satan in dragon form. So, I know this sounds insane, but I'm going to tell you, I'll land with two things. One survivor who said that from the age of 7 to 9, she was required to drink her first morning urine, which we know is rich in stem cells, with a black widow. Obviously, she was being groomed to be a black widow assassin. And the gentleman who was speaking earlier about Nathan Reynolds and the fact that he defected from the Reynolds rap family, as I mentioned earlier, if you stick your phone in a microwave, it will still ring. But if you wrap it in aluminum foil, it doesn't. That I figured out for myself. I want everybody to go try it. Know that Steven Spielberg is absolutely top level in the Luciferian Brotherhood. And if you want to know how they're compromising all these individuals and using the media, the movies, and the politicians are all in the same club. And they have degrees of separation, but that's what, like, people like me and Kathy O'Brien and Laura Worley, we're just like, what? And comparing notes, we're realizing that it's all one and the same. It's just the degrees of separation that kept us from realizing it. Thank you.
All right, Casey, more crazy rabbit holes. You're welcome. You're welcome. I thought we had a hand from TX Annie, but maybe not. Guy, go ahead.
No, TX has got the hand up. So if they're there.
Okay, yeah, I can't see it. TX Annie, do you have your hand up? You can go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, maybe I ought to make it yellow because it's a little too white. Anyway, yeah, I think Nathan says that he's mostly from the tobacco side of the Reynolds family, but there's a lot of different split offs of that family. But anyway, I love listening to him. And about Hollywood, Casey, did you hear that they're trying to move Hollywood to Austin, Texas now?
Doesn't surprise me. I mean, Hollywood, Florida is just a satellite of it.
Uh-huh. And everybody's like, fuck no. In Texas, we're like, oh no, no. But the Congress, it's hard to fight. Everybody's right now, we're all like fighting all this stuff. And, for the midterms, we do not want them bringing Hollywood to Texas. There's like no way. And about about London Bridge. Man, you need to talk to your friend Lori. She does not believe me. She said she has a lot of friends that have properties and stuff in like Havasu, and she has to really look into that. Yeah, maybe you need to sit down and talk to her about it. You know,
Thank you, Texas.
Yeah,
Texas Annie. I love that name. Guy, go ahead.
thank you.
Hey, yeah, I was just going to say the thing about biological connections to the UAP phenomenon has been something that's been looked into for a long time by like the shadow groups. Sorry, someone got the mic open. It's proper repeating on my end. But what was I say? The stuff in, like I was saying about Richard Lang and the second star team that was under the funding of Bigelow and Bass and the DOD. It's something that is very important, and no one really looks into it. I posted in the comments the 1992 unusual experiences from abductions and the statistics from it that state how many people in America are going through these like scary and traumatic experiences in some cases. Some people have really positive ones. The first two I experienced, though, they were freaky and terrifying and scary. And if I didn't go further into accepting what I was experiencing, that trauma would have stuck with me forever, I think. And some people they freak out at even the first one, and they go crazy and just take on everything that they're reading, and they don't accept it. They just get caught up in it, and it's very difficult to differentiate. But when I spoke up out about this the other day, and I do question my actual thoughts now, but I was challenged, and it was wrong because I'm a veteran and experiencer with documented experiences, ties with my uncle to nuclear projects and Lockheed, and nobody really pays attention or has ever really been bothered. And the whistleblowers that are coming forward, like I said, that they're not the ones that need to be listened to. It's people like Fringe, like B, you know what I mean? Like just the normal folk that are pushing for the facts and the truth. But when you get people that I'm with this and I'm part of this, I've been with MUFON and I've been with so and so, and they're battling against you instead of having an open mind and talking to you and trying to find level ground. It's difficult, and until that's broken through, it's going to be tough to get anywhere. But yeah, I'm gonna. You got a lot of hands up, but thank you for letting me speak. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Guy. Thanks for jumping up. I appreciate it.
I wanted to mention something, Fridge, if it's okay.
Oh, absolutely. Jump in anytime, Courtney.
Yeah, well, I was listening to Casey talking about Svali, and of course, when she came out so long ago with the one pastor, talking about her experiences, she caught a lot of our attention. And I didn't know she was triplet, but I also wanted to reference a really good documentary called Three Identical Strangers. I saw it a couple years ago at a film festival, and it was one of the best documentaries I've seen on twins and triplets. And it's a great documentary. And I don't want to spoil anything for anybody who hasn't seen it, but it's just, the whole thing is very well documented on the research around twins and what Casey brought up about twin studies in research.
Yeah, the overlap is extraordinary, and I know we have people listening who find what Casey is saying to be distracting and again, dangerous for disclosure because the UFO people don't want to sound any more batshit crazy than we already are. And then Casey starts talking and we all go, oh, well, never mind. But the overlap is there and it's not it's something we shouldn't ignore. Like she said, I think that the more we just keep the information to ourselves, I don't think we're doing ourselves any favors. So thank you for being here, Casey. I can't see any hands except for Miss McGillicuddy. Do you have a hand up there?
Yeah, I do. I just wanted to ask Casey something, and it does involve the show Taken. Um, and I watched that when it came out, and I had just had twins. I had this unhealthy like desire to just I had to watch it. Like I had no idea where it came from. I mean, it's not that I didn't enjoy movies or um, you know, it wasn't that, but it just was it was I mean like I was so hooked that I don't know. It was very strange. Obviously I'm sure Casey knows where I'm kind of going with this. Um, but yeah, does that sound like what I think it sounds like, Casey?
Well, I'm missing some of your nuance, but
I just mean in the text in the context of being just previous to realizing that I was what had happened to me in my childhood because I was a young mother and I just had twins and all of us in hindsight, as 2020, we're all experiencers. It's bloodline stuff. Um, do you think that ties in? Like, is that what I'm?
yeah, I absolutely do. And at the same thing that I mentioned, I haven't really spoken too much about myself genetically, but I have central heterochromia, so only 1% of the planet has it. If you go to my page, you'll see my eyes. So yeah, I have 4 different colors. I have brown, and then I have a burst of amber, and then green around that, and then these dark rings of blue. And it's been like that since I was a little girl. So that has I believe it's a genetic response to what they were doing genetically to manipulate me. And for me to have 5 sons, no miscarriages, no abortions, only 3% of chances that would happen. And then for all 5 of them to inherit an X chromosome that has this rare form of muscular dystrophy that's named after my last name, that would be like flipping a coin for all 5 of my kids to have inherited it and then to just need an internal defibrillator where they can be uploaded, downloaded, instantly accessed by the Internet of Things. That's not by accident. And of course, there are a lot of twins in my family. So yeah, it's absolutely an indication of their hybridization program from the past. And most people who produce twins are, in my opinion, based on the research that I've done, are a byproduct of these experimentations done. And even today, what I know that they're doing, and Svali, if you listen to her testimony, and that's the, the thing about me is that I've listened to 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day of research for the last 30 years. This is kind of what I do because I'm so like, I want to learn what the hell did they do. And I listen to testimonies from experiencers, from survivors, from every walk of life, and just trying to find this out. So what I know is that they are very fixated on producing twins and triplets. They utilize the stem cells through the IVF because what they're trying to do is create super soldiers that can be used in multiple locations who don't need to sleep. Because if you get someone that's super trained, the way Svali was trained as someone who is not only a satanic ritual abuse, she was made to witness several sacrifices herself, but then she became a programmer teaching others to do the same, which is, very sad. I mean, so devastating that could happen to anyone. But, my hope is that she is a clone and not, she doesn't know. She really doesn't know. But the interesting thing is just that somebody like her would come out and speak and people would just discount it. But there's so much crossover between other people's testimonies who come forward to say, I know this sounds crazy, but this is truly what happened to me. And so to the extent that we come to the table and compare notes, we find out that we're not alone. And that's why I support survivors, because we're the ones that actually can support one another. It's the psychiatrists and the psychologists that come out of the Rockefeller protocols. Most of them cannot handle trauma at all. They don't know the first thing about dissociation or really being able to help a true survivor, other than, here, take a pill and you'll be less depressed. And all those pills just make you more depressed. So yes, twinning is absolutely a byproduct of scientific hybridization. Yes, I believe though.
I just want to point out that Svali just came out recently, back again. She did a series of interviews with Emma Catherine. I know a lot of you probably follow her channel as well. She did updates and is talking about dissociation very specifically, and parts work in the community, and how her journey has progressed. So if you guys haven't caught up with Svali and her recent interviews with Emma, I think that's a good thing to reference.
Oh, thanks for that, Courtney. I wasn't aware of that. I don't know who this person is, so I'm gonna definitely head over to Emma's channel and check that out. I was just making notes here of all the overlap between our communities: dissociation, super soldiers, the perception of there being a spiritual war, breeding program, bloodlines, twins and triplets, birth defects, which we didn't talk about today, near-death experiences, sleep paralysis, mind control, abductions, trauma, abuse, bloody noses, sleepwalking, dead relatives, Neanderthal DNA. What's that little ridge on the back of the neck that a lot of people have? And then the Rh negative we didn't talk about either. But so much overlap between our two communities. So thank you for being here today, Casey. Let's see, we got Sugar back up in the space. Sugar, do you have a hand up?
Yes,
And
I
we
do.
have, did you say yes? I apologize.
Yes, I do, Fringe.
Okay, perfect. And then I can't see if Anjana might have a hand up.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Sugar.
okay.
Okay, great.
S-
I can't see
So,
him. Sorry, Courtney. You can jump in if you can see the hands.
so I was wondering if anyone has experience with astral travel.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty general question, but yes, I've been out of body many, many times outside of abductions.
So you can do it voluntarily?
I mean, I wouldn't try to do it voluntarily. Sometimes I just find myself there involuntarily, not something that I set out to try to do.
Okay.
I think that's another crossover area, is astral traveling, and also related to Kundalini. There's a lot of people who have described the Kundalini experience also as underneath kind of the caveat of spiritual awakening. And so it does tie in. I think a lot of people start to explore astral traveling as a first cornerstone onto understanding what's going on. And maybe they put the UFO thing in there if they encounter it or not, but it does seem to be another line of research. So
So when, so when,
go ahead.
yeah. So when I try to travel, I do not usually have to use any craft, you know. So I was thinking that maybe the craft, everything they say is what we can imagine, and the advancement they have is something that is beyond us, beyond our imagination.
Well, there was a great researcher out of India. This was about 2 years ago. She came onto the scene and she investigated Kundalini and other forms of astral travel and other types of city experiences. And she wrote a fair bit about it. I don't know if she's still in the community. I'll try to find her resources. But she talked a lot about it from a cultural perspective out of India and her research. So I'll try to post that if I can find her and her research. She wasn't a main researcher in UFO work, but she started tying in the UFO experiences in India with those lines of research. So I'll try to post that if I can find her.
Okay.
Sugar, go ahead.
Thank you. I was a big proponent of DNA, recreational DNA, when it first came out. I everyone knows 23andMe and Ancestry, but National Geographic used to do it for free when they first came out. The only thing is you had to sign off your rights immediately upon receiving your results, which I did through Helix. They folded. Helix, National Geographic's DNA program, has folded, and the two remaining, there's so many of them. There's some that you could take your raw DNA and you could put them into um, culture specific open source programs where you're sharing it with the community in hopes to find um, migration routes that are for indigenous people. So when it first came out, I was really big on volunteering information I shouldn't have done. So when my mother, because my father had cancer and my mother had three cancers, when I took my mother to her geneticist, they had recommended I also do a genetic test for familial cancers. And I also went through color.com, which where they do is they find out if you have any specific family markers for cancers, heart diseases, and also how you metabolize medication. Like I could take aspirin and it takes 10 minutes for me to get rid of a headache, but maybe 45 minutes for you. So they break down the components of how your body metabolizes specific um, medications. And when we got the results back, we went back to my mother's geneticist to share the information with them. And my mother's geneticist said to me, "Oh, you're a hybrid." And I said, "Excuse me?" And she said, "Because I'm a mosaic. I have mosaic DNA. I'm not, I'm not a chimera or chimera, however you pronounce that. I'm not that. That's mostly intersexed and DNA of two split DNAs. I also have two DNA markers as well." So I was always curious about that. And the problem is what they're discovering is a lot of the DNA databases have been hacked. And they belong to the major, like Google owns one of them, and they all belong to these major powerhouse data control centers, which concerns me because I do understand and I respect the fact, like the son, what was the California serial killer got caught through familial DNA. So I understand the importance of that, but I am curious if those databases with our DNA has been exploited to make divisions in people's communities to find um, those that are gifted have specific DNA markers. I know and this is something that's applicable, particularly in California, when we did our COVID vaccines, they required us to tell them what our race is. I'm mixed, so they required us to tell them what our race is, because they wanted to chart to see what communities were underserviced. And that made me feel uncomfortable in the fact that I felt that data could be exploited. And it's the same thing with our DNA that we volunteer, although hospitals have that as well, that stuff can be exploited from communities that are looking for specific um, markers of what you guys are speaking of as well.
Oh, Sugar,
True.
I love how you put that recreational DNA. I did the same thing and it was 23andMe. And some of why I did it is because I was adopted as a kid and I was kind of just wondering, who else might be out there. But I also did that whole cancer thing that you did, the cancer screening. I'm curious what you meant by the mosaic DNA, and then what specifically were you told about being a hybrid, and what DNA markers was she talking about, if you know?
Yeah, mosaicism is something that in the process of your um, while you're being formed, you have one strand of DNA that has like corrupted DNA and the other strand isn't. So you have an admixture of two sets of DNA. So, say you have a tumor, one tumor can say that it has one particular DNA, the other one has a separate one, which would have the corrupted coding in it, as opposed to those that are, I can't pronounce it, chimera. That's a completely different DNA as well, which is two, I think it's, I think it's two fathers, one cell or something like that, where that's where most of the intersex um, births are from, and that's a different type of division of two. So the reason they were looking specifically for that is because for me, our results, as you know, with color.com, they don't say that you are mosaic. There isn't a category for that. But when I went to my mother's geneticist, that's when I was told. So I don't know how they, because they tell you over the phone the results. So I don't know how they got the raw data to be told that at my mother's, and she did go to a really good research facility, how they were given that, because they weren't given the real raw data. So I was curious why that information was provided to her doctor. It seemed like it was a violation of my HIPAA. So I'm not really sure why that was an indicator for them to look through for a marker.
Wow, that is wild. I mean, that is a wild story. I'd be interested in any information, any more information. I don't know if you're curious for yourself or if you just want to let it go, but it sounds like good information to have.
Actually, what our medical industry is, it's actually made up, like they created fake diseases and fake reports and everything, and we trust them. They do not, the history that we have about the medical industry is completely wrong. So when they say they have disease cancer, it's not actually they have cancer. Maybe they didn't like the person, or they have some genes that don't they want to eliminate, like the Jesus bloodline. So that's why they do this. They create diseases, kill people, and that's my experience. It happened to me recently. My I was in a cult, so it was like I was trapped in a by some people. They used my children and copies to further trap me. So I was really concerned about their well-being. And what they did is that they, every time that I wake up and realize that this is a made-up world, you know, they try to trap me by turning my copies into animals and then sacrificing and eating them. So that's how horrible the situation is. This happened recently. They said that my sister has cancer and she died, but she didn't. It was just her consciousness was transferred to fish, and they cut it and eat it. So that's how horrible the situation is for the medical industry. Also, the diseases they say they have, it actually often try to eliminate some people.
Oh, I'm sorry, Anjana. Thank you for sharing that with us. And anything's possible in my world. I've seen way too much to discount that kind of thing for sure. Guy, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to touch on like what Anjana was saying. The DIA and the CIA, they've had a group running this for a long time now, and the the link between the biologics and the controlling of craft and so forth. The stuff that was done with DARPA, like about 15 years ago, the non-invasive implants, and the one that was showcased with the civilian paraplegic who piloted an F-16 on a simulator, and the the commander said that she piloted it better than pilots that have got like over 1,000 hours of flight hours. And the people that I believe that like are involved with the Skywatcher, the link between those and Essalon and the Explorers group. The Explorers group is it kind of like a Freemasonry pioneer group. Hubbard took two Explorer group flags to different places he was venturing to. The astronauts took one to the moon landing. I know like Tim Galladay and others have given lectures there, but one of the directors of one of the board members of the Soul Foundation is the director of the Essalon group. You know what I mean? It's all tied together, and as I say, the reason that Gary Nolan was originally hired by I'll say that the CIA and the DOD was hired by Putoff and I think it was Davis or Kit Green, but Green and Kelleher were struggling to link the reporting and the makeup of humans, the different characteristics to the phenomenon, and that's what Gary Nolan was recruited for. And like I say, these databases that have been collected, beginning with like Larry Hatch's and Jack Vallee's, but the Capella database goes back to the Invisible College with Hynek and Vallee, and that was like in the 70s, like a breakaway from the Blue Book, because Blue Book was just a farce basically, and the friendship between Hynek and Spielberg was a strong one, and that's one of the reasons why Hynek was kind of pushed away. But the 140 abduction reports that Bigelow purchased off John Carpenter, who was with MUFON, that contained extensive medical history, hypnotherapy, all stuff like that, blood samples and so forth. This again happened when they went into MUFON and destroyed that business, destroyed that non-profit company. They got hold of the CMS and added a third party box on there. So my report with MUFON, they can't find it. There's no history of it. But I've got the emails and I've got the investigators who worked on it. But the amount of reports that have been taken from people without their knowledge, and used for who knows what by these evil groups of people who come across saying that they're all working for us, but they're just taking from us. We've got nowhere in the last 8 years, and in my mind, it's got a lot worse. There's less information about the truth, a wide range of it, and it's being controlled. And anytime somebody slips up, people get attacked viciously, and it's not right. But I'm going to go to speak. But thank you very much, Fringe. I posted the Roswell movie in the comments. It's very, very good, and I don't know why it's not on any streaming services, but that's the actual real story of Roswell, of what happened. So yeah, thank you very much anyway, and take care, everybody.
Oh, thank you, Guy. I'll check that out for sure. Courtney, how are you feeling? I think I'm getting close to closing up. What do you have to add to that?
Yeah, definitely winding down, so we can close it out.
All right, thank you, Guy. Miss McGillicuddy. Let's see who else is here. Sugar, TX, Annie. I want to thank Casey for coming up. Again, I know a lot of what she talks about is completely outside of the comfort zone for the UFO community. So I appreciate anybody who stuck in with us through that. Thank you to Linda and everyone else who came up to speak. Thank you so much, Courtney. I think this was a great space today.
Thanks, Fringe. Thanks for offering to do it.
And with that, we will close it out and we'll see you all next time. Good night, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're at.